Our Little Histories. Princess Celestia. Once upon a time, there lived a noble unicorn. His name doesn't matter. He hailed from a family who traced their lineage directly to Princess Platinum of old. He was as rich as he was prudish and preferred the company of paintings of long-dead ponies to the company of those who still walk the land. Many mistook his reclusive nature for timidity, perhaps even stoic wisdom, when in fact he was merely disgusted by the world. Born after his time, he used to grumble. When he grew old and his age required him to join the Senate, he would rarely speak, but when he did, the hall would erupt in standing ovation. Not that his views were not controversial, he judged my sister and me, he urged the return of the old Senate without us to guide it, and most of all, he condemned Luna's practice of binding ponies to her soul. Although his opponents outnumbered his supporters, even they had to admit that his words carried an uncanny charisma, and from his mouth even the most outrageous of claims became reasonable. In his supporters he inspired a fervor the kind of which I have not seen since. Had they found out that he was not who wrought his own words, their faith may have faltered. He had opinions, to be sure, but his sheltered life had rendered him unable to express himself with the expected eloquence. I knew about it, Luna knew about it, the Night Guard knew about it. We would not reveal his secret, of course, for at the time I did not believe in silencing my opponents. In his mansion lived several families who had been servants of his for generations. They were respected, educated, and perhaps even cherished. Born to a simple maid, Veiled Quill showcased immense finesse with words. She studied rhetoric on the noble's money, and became the mayor to write his speeches. It helped that she shared most of the noble's scathing opinions, and she injected much of her own venom. The night before a sitting of the Senate, 3 night guards had been dispatched to watch over Veiled Quill while she stayed at the old castle. The noble she served never attended without her. Night Song perched on the balcony outside her room while Silhouette and Crescent Strike remained inside with Veiled Quill. She hated them, but law voted in part by the noble himself required us to protect all important personnel. A private joke, courtesy of my dear sister. While Crescent Strike stood at the door, Silhouette focused his attention on the mayor's bed, searching for any potential traps, magical or otherwise. The squabbling noble lot had been known for their treachery, all part of the reason they needed my sister and me. Veiled Quill sat patiently, her teeth clenched and gaze fixed on the opposite wall. She knew Crescent Strike was looking, yet she endured without a word. It would have been most improper for a lady of her caliber to lose her temper. Nice bracelet, Crescent Strike remarked. Veiled Quill flinched and shut her eyes as if something had struck the back of her head. She took a deep breath and paused for a moment to hold it in before turning towards Crescent Strike. Thank you, she forced out between her teeth. It was a gift from my husband. Oh, don't shoot me down like that. He chuckled, shifting his gaze to the mare's pregnant belly. If he listened just right, his bat ears could make out the faint beating of a tiny heart. It was a genuine compliment. You'll find we are entirely uninterested in such pleasures. Yes, I know all about Night Guard frigidity. She looked to the side, grumbling under her nose. Even Princess Luna doesn't want you to breed. Why do you hate us? She ignored him, turning to Silhouette. Are you quite done? Normal ponies need sleep, in case you've forgotten. Silhouette hopped into the bed and shuffled about on his back. Almost, ma'am. Not feeling anything off. He rolled off the other side of the bed and bent to feel the underside with a hoof. After a moment, he pulled out a little blue crystal. And the gem isn't glowing. No curses. He smoothed out the bed sheets, then took a step back and sent a nod. Your room is perfectly safe, ma'am. Good. Veiled Quill stood up and quickly paced to the bed. You can leave now. Silhouette nodded with a smile. He always smiled. Night Song will watch the balcony. Crescent Strike and I will stand guard at the door. If you need anything, you need only call. Thank you, she said, easing into the bed. I won't. Blow out the candles on the way out. She pulled the covers over her head and turned away from them. Silhouette reached for the door handle, but Crescent Strike stood in his way. The younger Night Guard wouldn't budge, his eyes still set on Veiled Quill. What if your kid turns out to be like us? Silhouette flared a stern look at Crescent Strike, to which he drooped his ears. He was just about to move out of the way when Veiled Quill sat up, eyes casting flames. My child. She closed her lips to hide her clenched teeth, drawing in a sharp breath through her nose. My child will be raised to be a productive member of society, unlike you motherless freaks.
Should she wish to serve the crowns, she will join her father in the royal guard.
She pointed to the door.
Out. The princesses will be hearing about this.
Crescent Strike opened his mouth, ready to lash out with an insulting comeback, but Silhouette spoke first.
Allow me to apologize on behalf of my partner. We shan't bother you any longer.
He blew out the candles on the nearby stand, then opened the door and threw Crescent Strike outside by the scruff of his neck. As the echoes of the door shutting faded in the cold hallway, the pair of guards took their places on either side of the door. Crescent Strike's slit pupils dilated, quickly adjusting to the darkness. When he turned his head, he saw Silhouette looking down on him with the eyes of a disappointed father.
No,
was all Silhouette said. Crescent Strike cast his gaze down, looking for his words between the stone tiles.
Don't you hate them?
He whispered.
You can't blame them for being afraid of something they don't understand.
Crescent Strike stayed silent for a while.
We've changed, haven't we? We do so much for them. For every pony.
Silhouette placed a hoof on his shoulder.
And that is all you need to know. They are not evil, son. Just uninformed.
He put his hoof down.
If you want to change their minds, be an exemplary night guard.
Crescent Strike nodded, turning forward. Silhouette spoke after a minute of silence.
I fear for Princess Luna.
Crescent Strike turned, and found Silhouette still looking forward.
You're feeling it too.
He nodded.
We all are.
He looked up, as though through the ceiling into the starry sky.
Something looms above us, something I can't name. We must be vigilant.
He turned to Crescent Strike.
Make the princess proud.
Crescent Strike turned forward.
We will.
Although Silhouette didn't answer, Crescent Strike's ears picked up the turning of his neck as Silhouette, too, looked forward. The two stallions would sit there all night, still as gargoyles, their senses never faltering. They were good at that, the night guards, being invisible. They all had to learn to be. Still Crescent Strike sat, blissfully ignorant of how fate would have him meet Veiled Quill again. New page. I didn't like my apartment very much. I was grateful to have a place to stay, of course, but it was tiny, dark, cluttered, and altogether uncomfortable. The Canterlot archives were a lot more homely. I hesitated at first with going back there, with how my previous visit ended. Eventually I figured that if they had discovered my identity, I'd have been taken away already, and with a small test coming up on the complete history of the era of the three tribes, I didn't have much of a choice anyway. I was lost in a book detailing how the era of warring kingdoms ultimately led to Commander Hurricane's rise to power when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I had my front hooves on the table, and in the reflection of my bauble bracelet I made out the dim silhouette of a royal guard. It took a second and the impatient clearing of a throat for me to look up. He stood behind my chair, with a spear over his shoulder and a piercing stare in his eyes. I recognized him as a guard I had briefly evaded on my way to the lunar wing a few nights prior. I felt my blood freeze in my veins.
Why yes?
I asked.
The archives are closing,
he grumbled.
Time to go home, kid. Oh.
I took a quick look around, finding no pony but myself, a few guards, and the kindly old custodian at her desk by the exit. The mare in the moon watched over all of us through the window with her brightly shining glare.
Sorry, I got caught up. Excuse me.
As I got up, I closed the book and lifted it for the guard.
I'll be checking this one out really quickly, if that's okay.
The guard's only response was flaring his nostrils by exhaling deeply. He stepped aside and cocked his head toward the custodian. I quickly dropped the half a dozen other books I had already checked out over the course of the afternoon into my bag, threw the bag over my back, and hurried to the exit with Ascending Hurricane between my teeth. As I placed the book onto her desk, the receptionist looked up from her own book. She adjusted her glasses, and her lips curled into a benevolent smile, the tips getting lost in the wrinkles of her cheeks.
You're responsible for making me work overtime, Paige. You know that, right?
I tried playing it off with a shrug, but I couldn't help a little smirk of my own.
A few minutes aren't going to kill you, Miss Mercy, are they? This isn't the first time, Paige.
She adjusted her glasses again and gave a patronizing glare.
It adds up, you know.
I sighed.
Sorry. Won't happen again.
That's what I had said last time. As Miss Mercy's horn lit up, she pulled the tome closer, and a floating quill dashed off a short line on a parchment that hung from the wall behind the desk. She pulled out a drawer to fish out a little blank, dipped a stamp in ink, then pressed the stamp onto the card. Slipping the card under the front cover, she gave the book back.
2 weeks,
she said, adjusting her glasses.
Like usual. Great. Can I? Yes, you can extend it,
she chortled.
But only once the 2 weeks are up and you really mean it? Thank you.
I dropped the book into my saddlebag and cast a glance toward the increasingly frustrated-looking guards.
Well, I won't keep you. Gotta get home. To my little rat hole.
Miss Mercy's magic gathered around a disorganized stack of papers, shuffling them together.
See you soon, Paige. Goodbye.
So I left, with a heavy stack of books in my bag and the judging stares of royal guards on my back. Once I was out of the archives, I slowed down to enjoy the calm night. A warm breeze swept across the street, gently caressing my mane. I decided not to fly home tonight, and the mare in the moon walked with me. I took out a sending hurricane from my bag. I'd left off, I remembered, at the part where the young hurricane got into a dispute with her father, and he threatened to disown her and cast her to the monsters, all those vile earth ponies, down below. I read on as I walked, hobbling on 3 legs along the curving slopes of Canterlot. The baubles of Mama's bracelet clattered around my hoof at every little hop. It was getting late, and although Celestia had abolished curfew a few weeks ago, every pony was still accustomed to getting home before nightfall. Save for a few Pegasi, armored or otherwise, whisking by above, there was hardly any pony in sight. A peaceful stroll and several pages later, I reached the southern district of the city, that inhabited by common ponies, construction workers, merchants, and even a few students like me. Up above, I could see the myriad doors on the crudely carved mountainside, each leading to a different but similarly cramped apartment. Well, I could have seen those doors, had I looked up. But I didn't, and that's how I managed to bump right into some pony as I rounded a corner. As I recoiled, the book got knocked from my hoof.
So sorry.
I pleaded without even looking up. My eyes were still on the ground, frantically looking for the dropped book. Then the tome appeared right in front of me, held by another hoof.
It's all right. Oh, thank you.
I took the book, turning it over in my hoof to check its condition. Oh, Miss Mercy's going to kill me if... Luckily enough, the book appeared unharmed. Giving a sigh of relief, I looked up. A pair of red eyes greeted me. It was a Pegasus, a few years younger than me by the looks of it. For a split second, I took him to be a mare. His mane was unusually long for a stallion, well brushed and lush as it flowed down one side of his head to his chin. His coat was white and the mane only a shade darker, the transition all but lost in the dark. He looked at me and cocked his head slightly to the side, showing a pleasant smile.
Are you all right?
I dusted myself off.
Yeah, fine. Sorry again.
I stepped around him and hastened my steps, too embarrassed to look back.
She vows revenge for the mistreatment,
the young stallion said. I turned to him in confusion.
Years later, she bests her father in a duel, but shows mercy.
Then it hit me.
Commander Hurricane. I'm quite fascinated by history.
He came closer.
As are you, I take it. Yes, well, I actually study history at the university.
I looked him over, then extended a hoof.
New page, by the way. Winter mist.
When we shook, his hoof felt unreasonably cold. Fitting, I supposed.
Cramming for a test, I'm guessing. Yeah. On that note.
I took a step back, and pointed a hoof up at the mountainside.
I really should get home. Lots to do, and I still need sleep.
He chuckled lightly.
Sleep? Are you really a university student? Join me for a drink.
He extended an upturned hoof towards the pristine pillars, a homely tavern just down the way. The signboard, which displayed a gold-colored image of a pair of pillars, swayed softly on its chains blown by the light wind. Through the tavern's windows a warm, yellowish light flooded into the dark street.
Spare a few minutes for me,
said Wintermist. Come on, really?
I think you're a little young for me, boyo.
He kept his hoof up, flaring his eyes once, as if in a dare. Looking him over, I had to admit. He certainly was something. He was more pretty than handsome, really, and the fact that he stood about half a head shorter than me made him all the cuter. Even his voice was soft, not particularly deep, and it carried a strangely alluring cadence. Plus, he did seem to know a thing or two about history. I didn't often get to talk to ponies like that. Not ones who weren't professors, anyway. I tried to force it down, but my lips curled into a smile. He bared his teeth in a sly grin, knowing he had won.
All right, Winters, I said, but you're paying. And I'm calling you Winters.
The pristine pillars was at once grandiose and rustic. The tavern's namesake pillars, engraved with floral vines and elaborate branches, stood worn and scratched from one too many drunks finding themselves thrown against them in brawls. The tables, made from rich woods, fared no better. Spilt drinks had long eaten between the cracks where even the most determined rag couldn't get them out. Something told me this place had been intended for visitors of, let's say, higher caliber clientele than who actually frequented it. The architects must not have realized that this district would become the one for the city's lower classes, or indeed, perhaps it had slipped their mind that there would ever be a lower class in Canterlot. Even in the city for the noblest and greatest, however, some pony had to scrub the dirt from outhouse walls. The owner had long since resigned to the fact, though, as evidenced by the run-down look of the place. Bits don't stink, as they say. The barkeep, a middle-aged stallion who lived right up there in the caves with the rest of us, washed a mug, the washcloth sweat swishes barely audible above the constant chatter and clinking of glass. The pristine pillars was open all night, ready to welcome any pony who might wander in, and wander in so many ponies did. They burped and talked loudly and sang even louder, flinging insults and laughter every which way. More prudish ponies might have thought this place unworthy of themselves, but me, well, I found it surprisingly easy to get swept up in the atmosphere.
Then he goes.
I banged a hoof on the table, trying to catch my breath between fits of laughter.
And then Storming Falls goes, but I thought Hurricane was inside the phalanx.
Wintermist put a hoof over his tightly shut eyes and turned slightly to the side. He bit his lips as his chest heaved with barely contained laughter.
Are you sure this guy is a Pegasus?
He chortled.
That's the best part.
I propped myself with two hooves, reeling from the laughter.
He's actually related to Hurricane. By blood, really? No way. Yes way. He took me to see the family, once. He's the real deal. Oh.
He raised a brow.
Do I have competition?
I shook my head.
Like I said. Once. And you would have to be in the race to have any competition.
He put a hoof on his heart.
You're killing me, Paige. Maybe next time, Winters. Oh, I'd be all for a next time.
I pursed my lips. I suppose I walked into that one. Looking to change the subject, my gaze wandered to the bottle of wine between us, still unopened.
You bought that, then you're not even going to drink.
He reached a hoof across the table and prodded the teacup before me.
As a rule, I don't drink alone, Mississippi. I only drink tea. I thought you said you wanted to sleep.
I lifted the cup and took a sip.
This is weak stuff. If I want to crash into slumber tonight, I damn sure will. Never needed much sleep, anyway. Is that so?
He leaned forward, resting his chin on the backs of his hooves.
Then we have another thing in common. I'm flattered by the effort, I really am, but you're trying way too hard. What? It's true.
He chuckled, which slowly turned into a long sigh as he leaned back in his chair.
In all seriousness, I like talking to ponies, be they attractive young ladies or not.
I pushed my seat out.
Okay, I think that's my cue to leave. I don't think this was time wasted. Do you? Be honest.
Furrowing my brows, I pulled my chair back to the table.
Let me ask you something first. How often do you do this, just talk to random ponies on the street? More often than you would think. It's an excellent way to learn. As you might have noticed, I quite like learning. If you like learning, I replied, apply to the university. Goodness knows you're already more educated than half that lot. Maybe.
He shrugged.
But I said I like learning, not studying. Different things. Talking to ponies is great. If you have an eye for the right kind of pony, I can only recommend it.
He leaned forward again.
You still haven't answered my question.
I pursed my lips.
What was the name of Clover the Clever's third son? Trick question. She vowed celibacy after the second.
Again, I couldn't help a smile.
Not wasted at all. Well then,
he said, offering a hoof again.
If you really want to go, I shan't keep you any longer. I'm glad we had this chance to talk.
He smiled at me, and I had to smile back.
You know what? So am I.
I shook his cold hoof again.
But don't get any ideas. Say, you live nearby. Oh, I'm not from Canterlot. Just visiting some friends.
He turned toward the nearest window. Outside, between the shadows cast by walls and jagged cliffs, you could just make out the moon silhouetting an unfinished spire of the palace.
It's quite amazing, really. I think Celeste is doing the right thing, building this city. Equestria needs hope. How old are you, again? 16, 17.
He rubbed his chin for a moment, then turned to me.
17 sounds about right. You're a really odd sort, any pony ever tell you that?
He chuckled.
Oh, absolutely every pony.
I slurped the last drops of tea from my cup, then stood up.
All right, you crazy pony, you. I really should get going.
He stood up as well.
You go on home then, don't let me hold you. I'll handle payment.
I turned towards the barkeep.
You hear that? Guy's paying.
Wintermist waved at him, and the barkeep waved back in agreement.
Okay then, Winters. See you around.
He smiled.
I'm sure we'll bump into each other again.
A stiff, suffocating mist enveloped me and made me shiver. I could feel my hair stand on end as tiny droplets condensed on every strand. The moisture ate into my coat and beads of it clung to my skin. My hooves carved the ground, white, rough, and chilling to the touch. Nothing to be seen around me except the desolate, rocky landscape that stretched out into the mist. A dim light poured from above, bouncing and refracting in the misty air. I walked, slowly at first, through the mist. There seemed no end to these wastes. I quickened my steps, and then I galloped as fast as I could. When I tried to fly, the sky weighed down on me, pushing me back to the ground. The mist seemed to go on forever.
Hello.
I called, looking this way and that.
Is there any pony here?
In the distance, behind the curtain of mist, I heard something. Like a mare's voice, but I could make out no words. She hummed a calming melody, and her voice resonated gently with the earth, tingling my hooves. The air brushed the hairs on the tips of my ears.
Can you hear me?
I asked, following the sound. The humming grew more distinct, louder but not obtrusive, until I finally saw the silhouette of a mare materialize beyond the mist. She sat still, back straight and chin high.
Are you lost?
I asked. As I approached, I came to realize that the mare was enormous, larger even than me, larger than any pony I had ever seen. Condensed water softly filmed her armor, collecting in tiny drops on the underside of her chest plate. A helmet crowned her head, a hole cut at her forehead to allow for her horn. She kept her eyes on the ground, and tears of irritation collected under her unblinking, slit pupils. She hummed on through a content smile, a serene tone to echo across the endless, barren plains. Every breath sent vapor swirling in the mist. I sat down in front of her, craning my head to look into her eyes.
Are you okay?
Her eyes turned in their sockets, but her body didn't move. She looked at me and blinked her tears away. She leaned her long, swan-like neck forward just an inch, only to be yanked violently back into place by some unseen force. The sound of chains resonated across the land. A halo of light lit up around her neck, then the light quickly subsided, burning away like a parchment cast into a fire, and in its place appeared a thick collar of shining metal. The light burned on as though at the end of a candle's wick, whisking swiftly into the air to reveal a rattling chain in its wake. The end of the chain, somewhere up above, quickly got lost in the mist. Her hooves began to glow. The quickly disappearing light left behind heavy shackles that bound her legs. The mare began to shine, and soon fetters and cuffs covered her entire body. Straps of metal and black leather bound her wings in a corset-like embrace, nails pinned her tail to the ground, and weights pulled on her armor. Hooks tore into her immortal, bloodless flesh down the back of her neck and her spine, pulling her skin away from bone. Their chains stretched infinitely in every direction. The last binding to form was a strap around her muzzle, muffling her hums. I had to take a step back to look over the scene, my jaw hanging. The humming stopped. She drew a sharp breath, and as her chest expanded, I saw her hooks and straps stiffen chokingly around her. The mare blew cold air into my face, as if asking me to pay attention. She turned her eyes upwards. My gaze followed hers, crawling up the long chain that bound her collar. High above, just before the metal disappeared entirely behind the curtain of mist, I saw a dark spot, one tiny speck of rust on the pristine chain. Time would triumph. All she had to do was wait and endure patiently. Far worse than mere physical suffering, she had to bear the slowly burning agony of hypocrisy and injustice. Her gaze slowly descended, and so did mine. When our eyes met, her lips parted beneath the strap and she grinned at me with a mouth full of fangs. The scene dissolved before my eyes. The mare faded into the mist, the ground disappeared under my hooves, and even the mist itself dissipated into nothingness. I awoke with my eyes on the ceiling and a descending hurricane lying on my chest. Another one of those dreams. Cold air brushed one of my hooves that hung off the bed. I got up with a yawn and a stretch, then stumbled half asleep towards the window. I bumped into my desk and cursed under my breath as a stack of books fell to the floor in a miniature avalanche. I didn't care to pick them up. I cranked the window's handle with a frustrated sigh, pulling it open for a second before slamming the damn thing shut. Up in the mountains, it got cold in the mornings, and the window never sealed properly. I took a second to appreciate that I had no classes that morning. No rush for me today. As I rubbed my eyes, I turned around and carefully stepped over the fallen pile of books. I took a right out of my room and wobbled into the bathroom. Leaning over the tub, I turned the blue crank. The rusty iron tube above spat and sputtered before it finally spewed a cascade of ice-cold water. I stuck my head in, letting it soak my mane completely. When the cold became too much to bear, I turned the crank back and whipped my head back. With a satisfied shudder, I looked at all the water my mane had splashed across the other wall. I usually let time clean that up. As I dried myself up and brushed my mane, I couldn't help but let my mind wander. Mama always told me ponies had recurring nightmares. It was normal, she said, and I shouldn't think much of it. It was all in my head, she had calmed me, the bad mare in chains could never hurt me. I was a little worried about the spot of rust on her chain, though, I couldn't remember seeing that before. It was strange, though. I never felt threatened by the mare in chains. These weren't nightmares, not really. In fact, whenever I saw her in a dream, I felt a sort of longing. In my dreams, I never cared how terrifying she was, or who she was. She felt like a friend long lost, and meeting her again always warmed my heart. Only after waking up did I realize, time and time again. And then I pondered. A mere 20 years after her banishment, Princess Luna had already become more the stuff of legend than a figure of history. Those few who had ever seen her only did for a few stolen moments here and there. In the years just before her banishment, she had supposedly become increasingly secluded from the world. The only ponies who might have had a deeper understanding of Luna were the night guards, and of course Celestia herself, but Celestia never spoke about her sister, and the night guards were long gone, banished by the elements of harmony along with their mistress. I couldn't recall when the dreams started. But I think I had been having them even before I knew about Nightmare Moon, or even the longest night at all. That wasn't right, of course. I couldn't have dreamed about her before I knew who she was. I just supposed I must be remembered wrong. Maybe it was these dreams that had made me so interested in history. That's why I studied as hard as I did, and why I could secure a scholarship in Canterlot University. It's how I had my own apartment in our nation's capital, and enough money to send home to Mama. In a way, Nightmare Moon shaped my life, though I was born mere weeks before her banishment. I could never shake this strange, sentimental affection to the mare in the moon. But I couldn't spend time reminiscing on dreams. I had a few spare hours that morning, and with Mama coming to visit for the summer sun celebration soon, I had something important to attend to. Once my mane was properly dry and didn't look like I had just escaped a thunderstorm, I grabbed a few spare bits and headed out. The streets below the apartments were lined with all manner of shops and stalls. Not far from the pristine pillars, there was one particular stall I frequented, not just for business sake, but also for company. Mrs. Pinegreens was an absolute gem of a mare of utmost kindness, who made bits by selling flowers cultivated in her garden somewhere in the lower parts of Canterlot Mountain. She'd always be up before the sun itself to pick and carry up the freshest batch each morning. And she lived just next door from me, too. Since I'd always have to pass by her stall on my way to the university, it wasn't long before our casual morning greetings grew into a little friendship. Trust was a rare commodity in Celestia's beautiful Equestria, and we cherished every precious drop. I didn't like flowers, myself. Made me sneeze something bad. But I knew Mrs. Pine Green's family needed the money, and I had some to spare, so I'd often buy one or two of the shorter-lived ones. This time, however, I'd actually buy something I'd use. You could always smell the stall around the bend before seeing it. Coming around, I found Mrs. Pine Green's tending to her flowers, just hanging a bunch from the top of the stall.
Good morning, Mrs. Pine Greens.
She froze for a moment before turning to me.
Good morning, Paige. Bit chilly this morning. How are you feeling today? Bit cold, bit cold.
She turned her gaze towards a vase on the stall, and reached with both hooves to adjust it. I thought it was fine before.
I'm fine.
She muttered.
We're fine. Anything catch your eye today? Well, I'm not looking for something for me, actually.
I shifted my weight to my hind hooves.
I'm visiting Papa.
It took a second for the realization to reach her. She cast her gaze down for a second.
Oh, I see. Well, I can put something together for you. I'd appreciate it,
I said, but she turned away before I finished. Mrs. Pine Greens seemed to avoid my eyes as she prepared a small batch of flowers. She picked one from below the stall, another that hung from above, and a few others from here or there, all without saying a word. I knew practically every obscure factoid about history a pony was allowed to know, and some we weren't, but this was Pine Green's territory, not mine. In the world of flowers, I was entirely lost. So for the most part, I trusted her judgment. I did notice a few black ones, though, so that probably meant something. Still, I worried. Not about the flowers, but about Mrs. Pine Greens herself. This morning she wasn't the chipper mare I remembered. Usually, whenever I bought something, she'd tell me all about the several names and meanings of each flower, or how best to arrange them for whatever purpose I desired. Now she prepared the bouquet in complete silence and hasty movements.
Is everything okay?
I asked. A flower slipped from her grasp. She didn't think long before kicking it aside and picking out a replacement. I knew her to respect flowers more than that.
I'm fine,
she said. Just
a little bit tired.
I leaned forward, placing a hoof on the stall.
Please, if there's anything I can help with. Maybe I need something for my room too.
She didn't respond. She didn't even look at me, but her hooves started working faster. She quickly wrapped the bouquet with a bright ribbon, tying it all to an evergreen wreath before stuffing it into my hooves.
Here,
she said.
15 bits and no more, Paige.
I decided it was best not to push the matter. I counted the coins before her so she could see I didn't smuggle in any more than she asked.
Thank you. I'm sure Papa would love this.
Yes, she said, turning again to fiddle with that one vase. I took a step back.
Well, I'll be going then. Until later, Mrs. Pine Greens.
She mumbled, turning the vase this way and that. It was only after I began walking the other way that I heard her call out.
Paige.
I looked over my shoulder.
Yes, Mrs. Pine Greens. Why you stay out of trouble, okay, sweetie?
I smirked.
I'm good at avoiding trouble.
And lying, apparently. I stopped to buy a few tea lights on the way to the cemetery. The stallion at the shop lit one of them for me. I'd have to carry it carefully so I could use it to light the rest. The cemetery spread out across a vast area of the mountain, below and on the other side from the city where the cliffs were less steep and the ground was softer. The grandiose familial tombs of the nobles needed space, after all. They stood largely vacant for the time being. Of course, Canterlot was a new city. Most of the ponies buried here for the time being were victims of construction accidents and the occasional old noble who happened to bite it around these times. Below the entrances to the great tombs lay all the smaller graves for commoners like us, only a few for now. The lowest level of the Canterlot cemetery was by far the most populated. It was an area dedicated to those lost in the longest night. Cenotaphs told of those who have never been found, and cheap headstones marked the resting sites of unidentified victims. Below the many graves to which no pony attended were the graves of ponies whose bodies were found and whose names were known. Celestia ordered them to be brought here so that they'd never have to rest in the accursed soil of the old city. I didn't visit Papa much. Somewhere inside of me, I always felt I should, but I never had a connection with him. I was far too young when he died to remember him. Silver spearhead, his headstone read. I only had a rough idea of what he even looked like, from a sketch Mama and Papa had bought from a street vendor early in their relationship. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't muster any sort of attachment to this dead stallion, though I knew I should have. If it hadn't been for him, Mama and I wouldn't have been alive today. But to me, that was all just history. Mama would surely come visit his grave when she arrived. I figured I should at least make it look like I cared. After pulling out a few unruly weeds, I placed the tea lights down before the grave. Placing the flame of the one burning light against the wicks of the rest, I lit them all. In a safe distance from the tiny flames, I placed the wreath and bouquet against the gravestone. I spent a moment looking at the scene. The corners of my lips curled up.
"Thank you, Papa,"
I whispered, then turned my head to the sky.
"And I'm sorry."
As I eyed the sky, I noticed an older Pegasus stallion a few rows up the cemetery. He stood solemnly by a headstone among the ones dedicated to ponies whose bodies were not found or wholly recovered. When you study history, it's easy to fall into the trap of focusing only on the biggest, quote-unquote most important aspects in events. It pays, I've found, not to forget that history is more than that. History is the little things, it is the little pony, and her little tragedies. I wondered what this stallion's story was. Did he also lose a spouse, or a comrade in arms? What did he see? I was going to leave, take wing and go home to rest for a few minutes before heading off to the archives. Then I remembered Wintermist's advice. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to talk to strangers every once in a while. If Mrs. Pinegreens was any indication, I had a face that the older generation liked. It's worth a shot, I thought. Unfurling my wings, I flew up the rows as silently as I could. The stallion didn't seem to bat an ear. I alighted softly behind him and peeked over his shoulder at the headstone. There was nothing on it but a name, black spot, and a date marking the longest night. The grave itself was also plain, no candles or tea lights, not a single flower to be found. The stallion stood still as a statue before it. With his plain grey coat and darker mane, he certainly could have passed as one. The only color on the entire pony was in his cutie mark, a paintbrush with a touch of red at the tip. Worst case scenario, I figured, he'll tell me to buzz off. I straightened my back and cleared my throat.
"Excuse me, sir."
One of his ears perked and turned towards me. After a second, it turned forward again.
"My name is New Page,"
I continued, waiting a few seconds. No reaction. Well, I already started.
"I study history at the university. Forgive me, I do not mean to intrude, but I couldn't help but notice the date on the headstone. I was wondering if you would like to share your story."
That sounded a lot better in my head. The stallion sat still for a short while. Then, closing his eyes for a moment, he sighed deeply. Finally, he turned his head towards me. Though his body had seemed surprisingly fit for his age, his face was marred by rugged wrinkles that made him look older than his eyes let on. A thick, hairless scar ornamented his right cheek, a sign of a heroic battle, or a bar brawl, perhaps. As he stared, his sunken, golden eyes held no emotion. He looked me over before finally speaking.
"Leave me alone, lady,"
was all he said before turning back to the headstone. His voice was deep and inherently intimidating, though I heard no anger in it. I nodded, fully knowing he wouldn't see.
"I meant no disrespect."
I waited for a response, but received none.
"I apologize."
Again, nothing. It would be best to leave quickly, I figured. Spreading my wings and kicking the ground away, I mentally patted myself on the shoulder. At least I tried. Magic mirror on the wall. Princess Celestia. I have seen but one monster in my life, and her name is Nightmare Moon. It is she who haunts the weak in their loneliest hour. She sows the dreams of the brave into chilling horror. She is the engine of fear and the devourer of hope. The thunder of her hooves grinds dreams into nightmares, and her laughter crushes the spirit of even the greatest warrior. Throughout the longest night, Nightmare Moon reveled in the end of her world. For 2 weeks, I watched and pleaded. For 2 weeks, I stood idly as my own sister ravaged Equestria. I thought I could convince Luna to return to me. 1,000 years hence, sometimes when the sun is gone and the moon is high, I still hear the screams, the echoes of my greatest failure. Nightmare Moon created many fiends to do her bidding, ponies turned fiends by perversions of the soul, and demons that drank the blood of the body and tortured the minds of the innocent. Born of her star main, indescribable, amorphous mountains of tangible hate and hunger raked the most distant lands with loathsome mouths and pseudopods. Common folk turned on one another, driven mad either by the nightmare or the destruction of the world around them. Nightmare Moon's goal was not merely to kill. She wanted all of us to suffer. She did not merely bring about eternal night, she ushered in an era of fear. Yet for all the beings to which her magic gave shape, none were as cruel as Luna's oldest and most beloved creations. When the nightmare seized the heart of my sister and plunged her into madness, the bitterness in her heart overflowed. The ethereal threads that joined her to the night guards conducted her sorrow and hatred, awakening in their minds the same desire to tear down the world. The nightmare preyed on the darkest, suppressed fancies that reside in all minds, and her foul magics unleashed them upon the world. For the night guards, notions of perceived injustice came boiling to the surface. Petty grievance intensified into murderous rampage, and long-repressed fantasies of elaborate vengeance over minor offense now came to be played out in all of their sick, twisted glory. The nightmare gave no orders. The nightmare did not force their hooves. She merely laughed as they performed acts that bore no names, all of their own volition. The night guards had protected the heart of Equestria. They were stationed in the old city and oversaw the nearest settlements and lordships of the nobles' houses. While the many demons of Nightmare Moon laid waste to the outer lands, the night guards destroyed that which we treasured the most. First, the night guards swarmed into the city, that's where it all started. The royal guards who protected the castle were the first to fall, stabbed in the back or murdered in their sleep. By the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. When I flew to the castle, I was greeted by the head of a royal guard impaled upon the tallest flagpole. By the time an alarm was raised, the library was in flames. By the time we began evacuating the city, the bridge had fallen. We lost the old city in a matter of minutes. Nightmare Moon laughed, her voice resonating across the land. For a while, the night guards were content with desecrating the old city. Only in later days of the longest night did they spread to the lands outside. When they did, the meager blockade around the city cracked in hours. Smoke blocked out the stars and corpses, and ash covered the fields. The nobles vied for whatever protection the royal guards could give. They stuffed pitchforks and torches into the hoofs of every last serf and servant to protect their skin. The manor of an old noble held its ground the longest, not by virtue of strength but by being the farthest from the old city. That night, a very special mare sat in the darkest corner of that manor's smallest bedroom, cradling her newborn and begging the sun for the nightmare to end. It was Night Song that tore up the boards covering a window of the attic. Crescent Strike followed her inside as the rest of their group distracted the royal guards. They stomped hard at each of their steps, they wanted those hiding underneath to hear their approach. The added fear sweetened their inevitable demise. Crescent Strike bucked open the barricaded door of the attic, and the pair made their way down the dusty, cobweb-covered stairwell. On the lower floors, they looked through every hallway, checking door after door in search of cattle to slaughter. They found a pair of maids in one room, and threw them through the boarded windows to signal to their friends outside. When they got to the room of the old noble's daughter, they saw that another pair of night guards had already broken in. As one of them tore her portrait from the wall, the other reared above the crumpled mare, his hooves shining red with her blood. Crescent Strike looked with perverted glee at the daughter's precious, sun-loving face, deformed beyond recognition by a hail of hooves. Night Song sent him a look. They would have to hurry, lest some pony got to their mark before they did. Crescent Strike would have hated to place second in this race. So he pushed on, following the scent of the mare he hated the most. In a small, untouched bedroom on the second floor, they finally found the source of the stench. When they broke down the door, however, they were greeted by a lone stallion with a white coat under a suit of golden armor. He spread his wings and flourished his spear.
"Stand away, monsters!"
he warned.
"I don't care what you do to the others. But if you dare set hoof in here..."
He tensed, jamming his spear forward.
"I'll hack you from your groin to your neck."
Crescent Strike turned to Night Song with a smile. She smiled back, and took the first step inside.
"Put that down," she said. "That's no toy, boy. You could hurt yourself. You're not even holding it right."
The stallion took a step back and stabbed into the air. The spear shook in his grasp.
"Get away."
Crescent Strike walked inside, and took a step further than Night Song.
You're not supposed to harm Princess Luna, Royal Celestia's orders, haven't you heard?
Night Song walked forward, overtaking Crescent Strike and backing the royal guard into the wall.
Hurting us is hurting Luna, you know. We're one and the same, she and we.
The stallion swallowed, forcing a brave expression and trying to hold the spear steady.
Not another step. I'm warning you.
Crescent Strike took another step.
Or what?
The royal guard lunged forward with the roar of a cornered beast, thrusting his spear at Crescent Strike. He dodged, but not soon enough, the spearhead entered his mouth and pierced a hole through his right cheek. As he reared back with a terrible shriek, he brought up his bat wing to snap the spear in half, leaving the guard with only the broken handle. Night Song charged the stallion, and he raised the handle to block her. Night Song rammed at him full force into the wall. The stallion resisted in vain. His feeble Pegasus strength proved no match for the night guard. She grunted as she pummeled him to the floor, stomping and trampling the helpless stallion. His bones snapped and broke under the pressure as though they were nothing more than rotten old wood. Crescent Strike pulled the spearhead from his cheek with a spurt of blood. He spat and gurgled, lumbering over to Night Song to push her off the stallion. He reared and slammed his hooves onto the royal guard's neck and listened for the satisfying crunch of his throat. To finish the job, he picked up the spearhead. With one swift strike he planted it in the guard's mouth and drove it through the tissue, pinning the thrashing stallion to the floor by the back of his head. He wiped his cheek and licked the blood from his hoof. The laughter of Nightmare Moon resounded in his mind to congratulate him. He sat onto his defeated foe and straightened his back. Puffing his chest, he closed his eyes and breathed in. The torn flaps of the skin of his cheek smoldered as his hot blood welded the flesh back together. The laughter in his ears slowly faded, and he tuned out the dying whimpers and sputters of the royal guard. His ears rotated. At the back of the room stood a tall wardrobe. Inside, a mare whispered, barely audible even to herself.
Please, she begged, don't cry now. Hush now, quiet now. It's all right. Please, not now.
As Crescent Strike's eyes opened, his lips parted into a grin. Night Song sensed his satisfaction, she had heard too. She walked silently, with the poise of a cat, to the wardrobe and placed a hoof on the handle. She tore the door from its hinges, throwing it across the room. The mare facing her clutched her baby and screamed in terror. Crescent Strike walked over.
Hello, Veiled Quill.
He winked.
Still love that bracelet, by the way.
With eyes shifting between the night guards and the brutalized corpse of her husband, Veiled Quill crawled away and pressed against the back of the wardrobe as though she meant to seep through the very wall. She shook her head violently, pleading, screaming.
No. Please, no, I'm sorry.
In her lap, the baby began to cry. Night Song leaned closer.
What is that sweet filly's name?
Veiled Quill tried to shrink away, but there was nowhere to hide.
Don't hurt her, I beg you. You want me, not her.
Crescent Strike lunged forth, putting his front hooves inside the wardrobe and pressing his forehead against Veiled Quill's.
She asked you a question, you tactless wench. New Page.
She wailed.
Her name is New Page. She's never done you any harm. Please, leave her.
He reached for the baby, but Veiled Quill bit his leg. He groaned and slammed the hoof into the mare's nose. The wardrobe's wall gave her the next blow. Before the mare came to, he tore the baby from her grasp. As Veiled Quill jumped at him, Night Song tackled her to the floor.
She's innocent.
Veiled Quill cried, reaching a hoof in vain towards Crescent Strike. He scoffed.
Aren't they all?
He began making his way to the boarded window.
All night, that's what every pony's saying. They're always innocent. They've always loved us. The only thing they love more than us is Princess Luna and her beautiful starry nights. Funny how that works.
Cradling the baby with a wing, he reared on his front legs and crushed the boards on the window with a single kick of his hind hooves.
What are you doing?
Veiled Quill wailed. She tried to move, but Night Song put her down with a swift hoof to her stomach.
Please, oh stars, please don't. Let's see how this little Pegasus flies,
Crescent Strike said.
Please.
Veiled Quill screamed, her face screwing up with desperation and terror.
I'll do anything.
Crescent Strike looked her over, savoring, almost enjoying, the sheer disgust he felt for Veiled Quill's revolting visage, the drool on her lips from her screams and her runny nose from all the crying. He had to laugh.
You don't seem to understand where you are.
On cue, Night Song sent another hoof into her face, silencing her wails. She sniffled back the blood that dripped from her nose. Nightmare Moon laughed in Crescent Strike's ear and her hoof stroked his mane.
Make sure she's looking, Night Song,
called Crescent Strike. He took one last look at the baby and gave her a peck on the forehead. For just a moment, either out of fear or confusion, the child stopped crying.
Goodbye, little new page.
He cast the baby out the window and followed her arc with his eyes. Veiled Quill extended a hoof towards the window, and screamed for the last time in her life. The baby hit the earth, and oh, the sweet crunch of her tiny body crumbling and snapping at the collision. Inside Crescent Strike's head, the thunder of Nightmare Moon's cackling drowned out the world. Veiled Quill's scream died, and she stared. She stared, her mouth still open but breath seeping only in a silent whimper. She stopped struggling. She almost forgot to breathe. Her hoof went limp. Night Song stomped on her groin. Veiled Quill barely made a sound, and didn't even look at her. Her eyes were set still on the window.
I think we're done,
Night Song said with a satisfied smile, stepping off her. Crescent Strike looked at Veiled Quill, and she looked at him. For him, he would never forget the face of the mare from whom he had taken everything. For her, the depraved glee in the monster's eyes would forever be etched into her mind. There was one more thing he could do, Crescent Strike realized. One more thing to absolutely break the mare. He grinned in anticipation, and licked blood and drool from his lips.
You go ahead,
he said, biting onto the scruff of Veiled Quill's neck. He pulled the mare to her hooves, though she could barely stand. Her weakness excited him, he could feel the heat rising below. Night Song took one look at him, and giggled cheekily. As she left the door open so that the others might watch. Crescent Strike threw the limp mare onto the bed. She did not resist. And so it began, the crowning act to the Nightmare's theater of horrors. The longest night came to an end in 3 days' time. A search party found Veiled Quill curled up under the same bed, discarded like a wet tissue and clutching a bauble bracelet in her hoof. She was conscious but catatonic, a broken, gibbering husk of a mare. Swift sweep. Without an assigned scribe, I was forced to crudely carve every letter by mouth and hoof. I wasn't good at that, writing. It took a few minutes for all the characters to come back to me. I jotted down the current date at the top of the page, and began surveillance for the first night of Project Bookworm. Our orders were to watch New Page's apartment and find out why she was stealing books from the archives, whether she worked alone for her own amusement, or perhaps if she was part of a greater, clandestine operation. She spent most of the day out of the apartment, at the university or the archives where Lullaby and I couldn't reliably follow her. We had more than enough eyes in both places, however, so we didn't have to, and evidently, the princess wanted this job done with as few ponies as possible. The day shift consisted mostly of watching over an empty apartment and reporting the nothing that happened. As such, Lullaby had been kind enough to volunteer me for the night shift. Not that it was much more exciting, New Page reportedly came home rather late every day, and there had been few reports of her ever leaving the apartment at night time. Then again, it took a while for the archives to notice the missing books, and even when they were expecting the thief they failed to catch New Page. There was more to this young mare than she let on, I couldn't allow my attention to waver. Following my episode back in the apartment, Lullaby and I made an agreement not to mention it. I only needed some air and a moment to collect myself, and then I was ready to work as I'd ever been. Well, that was not true. I knew it, and Lullaby knew it, ever the good friend, however, she did not bring it up. Yet I could not shake the feeling that Lullaby was testing me. I'd have to make it through my shift without another breakdown. The rules were simple, keep the candles low and your eyes sharp. Strictly surveillance only, if anything happened, we'd report it to Celestia. I supposed this was the only thing she dared trust us with after Project Heartbreak. Although the unfurnished apartment above New Pages provided a reasonably good vista of the city by day, by night darkness blanketed most streets. In the distance, the palace and the archives were lit up by lights both magical and conventional, and the most traveled streets were lined by the occasional gas lamps. For the longest time, I saw no sign of New Page. One thing concerned me, or one pony, to be more precise. I could not tell if it was a stallion or a mare, though from its small stature and long mane I guessed female, and quite young at that. She sat motionlessly at the door of a closed shop, just around the bend of the street, her white coat and mane practically glowing in the light of the lantern above the door. There was no curfew at the time, so there was nothing outright wrong about some pony sitting there in the middle of the night, yet I couldn't help but wonder. What was she doing? Or rather, why wasn't she doing anything? If I hadn't known better, I might have taken her for a statue. I wondered if I should write anything down, but ended up not doing so. It wasn't my job, not now. It was about 10, maybe 15 minutes after the archives closed for the night that I first noticed New Page from the window. Her gaze was buried inside a book she held, hobbling forward on 3 legs on her way up the cliffs. A second before she came around the corner, the white mare stood up and took 1 step forward. In the next moment, New Page bumped straight into her, recoiling and dropping her book. The mare picked it up, New Page quickly took it back, and hurried on with her head low and ears drooped. I could see the embarrassment from all the way up here. The mare said something to make New Page pause. She turned back, and the two exchanged a few words. Whoever the other mare was, New Page didn't seem to recognize her, neither was she too keen on whatever she said. She stepped away, only for the other mare to point a hoof towards the nearby tavern. New Page took a reluctant step towards the mare, and nodded after a moment of deliberation, brushing her mane back. How strange. Although New Page was reportedly friendly, she wasn't known for actively participating in meaningless social rituals, not unless pressed. Always in a hurry, that girl. As New Page and the other mare walked for the tavern, I began writing. I didn't get the impression that she recognized the white mare, but the other one definitely recognized her. Saturday alone in the middle of the night, moved exactly when New Page came along to bump into her, she had to have been expecting her. I could have learned far more, of course, had Celestia in her wisdom not forbade me from leaving my post. Oh well. I guess I'll just stay up here. The two spent half an hour, maybe a while longer, in the tavern before New Page emerged alone. She walked more slowly now, awestruck perhaps, or intoxicated, and carried her book by its spine between her teeth. She stopped halfway up the cliff, looking at the sky, the moon, perhaps, before finally entering her apartment. As she walked through the door, I moved my chair from the window to the enchanted mirror. She threw off her bag and collapsed into bed, spitting the book out. For a while she lay still and breathed heavy, tired sighs. Eventually, she raised her head and dragged herself out of bed, practically oozing off the side before standing up properly. She fumbled through the dark room towards her desk, stubbing her hoof at the edge and cursing a little, and rummaged around in a drawer before pulling out a tinderbox. She laid out the kit onto her desk, flint and steel, a char cloth, and a bundle of sulfur sticks. Snapping the flint against the steel, it took her a few clumsy hits to produce a spark great enough to ignite the slow-burning cloth. After a few minutes of trial and error, she had managed to get a few embers going, and she blew on them to get them hot enough for use with a sulfur stick. She put the tip of a stick against the cloth to light it. Once it caught, she quickly brought it over to a candlestick hoisted above her bed. With the candle lit, she shook the sulfur stick to extinguish its flame, then stomped on the char cloth a few times to extinguish that too. She didn't bother with putting the kit back together. Throwing herself into the bed again, she picked up the book she had been reading all the way home. She flipped onto her back and wiggled about, finally releasing a satisfied sigh with the book standing on her chest, the light of the candle falling on it at just the right angle. This was the first time I saw her, when I really saw her. The spectral projection I had seen at the archives stayed true to basic shape and silhouette, but distorted color and eschewed fine details. From the files we had collected, I already knew about New Page, though I did not know her. Now in the dim candlelight, I had an opportunity to take a close look at this enigma of a mare. The memories of the longest night would haunt me until the day I expired. I could never forget the atrocities I had committed, and I might never wash the blood from my hooves. Her blood. She had changed. I remembered her coat in a different, brighter color, and on her neck there used to be a little dark spot. And she had grown so much, when I took her into my hooves on that fateful night, I could barely feel the weight. She was a dark brown all over, no spots to be seen. Her dark grey mane was as thick and luscious as I had seen in the archives, but oddly crude, almost wire-like in texture. Her cutie mark, a half-filled parchment before a waxing moon. Hello again, New Page. How have you been? I kept a small, circular metal plate on the desk beside me. In the middle of it was a red gem encircled by an etching of the sun. Tapping the center lightly, the plate flashed and quickly began heating up. Beside the plate stood a kettle and a cup. I didn't bring tea, Lullaby had suggested I try this new coffee they'd recently began importing. I poured a cupful and left it to warm up on the sun plate. Around the time that the cup became comfortably hot, the book slipped from New Page's hooves. Her head fell to the side, mouth open and chest expanding with slow, sleeping breaths. One of her hind hooves twitched and clopped against the wall. She didn't wake. Like a big baby. I took a sip of coffee, and nearly dropped the cup as the astounding bitterness flooded my mouth. It burned my throat and stung my nostrils. I could barely put the cup down without shattering it. Come to think of it, Lullaby mentioned I should buy sugar. As the taste slowly faded, I wiped the tears from my eyes. New Page was still asleep. I prided myself on being able to read other ponies. To me, she seemed innocent. I knew for a fact this was untrue. I had seen the recording of her breaking into the lunar wing, and I had found the very book she stole in her apartment. My history with her had to be clouding my judgment. But no matter how long I looked, I couldn't imagine her harming a soul. If it was knowledge alone she desired, I'd have felt deeply sorry to lock her away. A cold rush of realization ran down my spine. I should not have felt sorry for an enemy of Celestia. And before, I never had. Lullaby came to take over just before the crack of dawn. Having lost a wing, she couldn't fly. I took shameful pleasure in watching her walk all the way up the steep slopes. Must have been my old insecurities regarding her acting up.
So,
she began as I let her in.
How was the night? About as eventful as you would think.
She put her saddle back into the corner, then walked for the mirror and took a long look at New Page. She turned towards the desk to pick up the night's report.
And the coffee?
She asked as she read, pacing the other way. I shrugged.
I can't see it catching on.
She waved the report.
What do you make of this white mare? An employer, or at least potential one, if I had to guess. I wonder if she'll show up again.
Sighing, I went for the door, cracking my joints with every slow step.
All I know for sure is that I've got a nasty cramp in my neck from looking in that mirror all night. Oh.
Lullaby lowered the scroll, batting her eyebrows at me.
Like what you see.
I yanked the door open.
No. Why the hurry?
She chortled.
Come on, she isn't that ugly.
It took all my willpower to gently close the door instead of slamming it. I turned back towards Lullaby.
You know who New Page is? Course I do. You watched me.
I stepped forward with a stomp. In the mirror, New Page's leg twitched and clopped against the wall again. One of her front hooves slipped and fell beside the bed with another clop. Her eyes remained closed. I continued towards Lullaby, now with silent steps but no less frustration.
You helped me. And you treat it like a joke.
She pushed a hoof against my chest, keeping distance.
Easy there, small boy.
I slapped her hoof away.
Don't.
I fought to contain the tremors of anger rising inside me.
You're as guilty as I am, don't act like you're innocent. None of us are innocent.
I took a step back, looking around the empty apartment.
What are we doing here, Lullaby? Celestia gave us this chance to atone for our crimes. I'm here so I can make up for what I did.
I stuck a hoof towards the mirror.
What I did to her.
Lullaby scoffed.
We make up for our crimes against Equestria by doing what Celestia wishes. What you feel, what I feel, is not relevant. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. We've had this conversation before.
I stepped to the mirror.
Look at her. I don't know how she's alive. But I've already destroyed her once, and...
I choked on that last word. I shook with anger, not at Lullaby but at myself. I wasn't supposed to be like this. Icy blood and an iron will, that's what I'd always had. I've never felt like this, I wasn't supposed to feel like this, I never thought I'd ever. Pain struck my lower jaw as my teeth crunched. I stopped grinding them. I hung my head.
I've ended her life once. I'm supposed to do it again.
I felt a hoof grab my shoulder, giving it a firm grasp and a shake.
She chose her path. It's not your fault.
I turned to her.
Isn't it? If she survived when I
swallowed.
If she survived that fall, I don't know what happened to her. It's no wonder she had turned out wrong. Look.
She retracted her hoof.
We don't know why she's doing what she's doing. It might be nothing serious. Please, you've seen the list of missing books. Tomes on night guards, vampires, madness, soul magic, blood magic. What do you reckon a history student, a Pegasus, no less, does with such material? She's working for some pony, it's obvious. Or she's a freelancer, selling to the highest bidder. So you agree she deserves whatever she gets? She does.
I looked for reassurance in Lullaby's eyes.
She really does. But...
I turned back to new page, at her peaceful, dreaming half-smile and twitchy leg.
Look at her. I know she's guilty. She has to be. But I can't believe it.
Again, I turned to Lullaby. This time, I paused for a breath before speaking.
I'm slipping, big girl. I could have you be reassigned.
That made me tense up.
No, calm down,
Lullaby quickly added.
That is an offer, not a threat. For your own good, only if you want it. Clearly this project is hitting you hard.
She extended her hoof and wrapped a leg around my shoulder, pulling me in.
I understand, I really do. I joke to cope.
I turned the thought over in my head. Yes, reassignment would be for the best. Assuming Lullaby got to choose where, anyway. It would have been much easier to get away from New Page, away from the one pony that has ever made me question my conviction to Celestia's service. To question my role in the EBSS was to question Celestia herself. To question Celestia was to doubt Equestria, and to doubt Equestria was to harm us all. I knew that.
Look at me, small boy. Look at me.
She grabbed one of my hooves and clutched hers tightly around it. I had to look in her eyes, and as I did, I squeezed right back.
I know how much our job means to you,
she said.
That's why I agreed not to bring this up in the first place. But as the leader of this project, I can't allow your conscience to jeopardize it.
She let go and stayed quiet for a moment, eyes staring into me. Her hoof moved to brush my cheek. Lullaby had never been the touchy-feely type, she quickly put her hoof down. I could still feel the warmth of her touch on my face.
More importantly, she said, I don't want you to be hurt. You really want me to give this up? Because I care about you, you buffoon.
She snorted, a crooked grin creeping up her face. She shook her head.
Since Silhouette died, you've been my little baby boy.
To question Celestia was to doubt Equestria, and to doubt Equestria was to harm us all. I found myself grinding my teeth again, and my hooves dug nervously into the stone floor. Indoctrination, all of it. It had not been Celestia's doing, we old dogs did it ourselves. It was the only way to cope. I see blood and an iron will with which to focus on the task at hand. We never strayed from the course, for all other paths were far too perilous, we never looked back for the past was far too horrifying. Never look back at the past, lest you spoil Equestria's future. It was easy, wearing the workhorse's blinders. Just let this project go, I told myself. Continue serving Equestria. Simple. Clean. The coward's way out.
So, what do you say?
Asked Lullaby.
No.
I straightened my back and breathed in deep, exhaling a sigh of relief.
I'm staying.
Better face my past than let it control me. Lullaby turned to the mirror.
Are you sure you're up to this?
I wanted so badly to do the right thing.
If she's guilty, I need to be the one to prove it.
For Equestria.
If.
I glanced at New Page.
Is there any pony we couldn't prove guilty, really? You, me, even the majestic flanks of Celestia can become the enemies of Equestria if we want them to.
Lullaby cast me a suspicious glance.
Are you implying Celestia would send an innocent into the dungeons? Have we ever done that?
As I shook my head, I couldn't suppress a smile.
Of course we haven't.
I walked for the door.
See, this is exactly why I can't be reassigned. If, when, we prove New Page guilty, I need to be the one to do it. This way I can make sure.
She raised a brow.
Sure that we don't destroy the lives of innocent ponies. We pride ourselves on catching monsters, big girl.
I put a hoof on the doorknob.
I merely want to make sure we've stopped being monsters ourselves.
When I was a night guard, I'd regularly spend a week or more without a wink of sleep. After Celestia purged Luna's magic from our bodies, that became an impossible task. Even a single night spent awake severely impacted my capabilities. My age didn't help either. But I didn't go to sleep, not yet. I took a quick detour to the archives. From the royal clerks there, I asked to find all records regarding New Page. Her birth, her death, her life that had apparently been unimpacted by the longest night. I wanted everything, down to the tiniest morsel of information. Because she had been born before the EBSS was established and because it took near on a decade for the organization to reach peak strength, reports of her early life were far more scarce than information of later years. Apparently, the body of a baby filly fitting my recollection of New Page was found after the longest night, although her identity had never been confirmed. And while her mother Veiled Quill had been found alive, she never came forth to report the death of her ostensible only child. As far as the records showed, New Page had never died at all. That was all they could give me on a preliminary look, but they assured me they'd conduct a more thorough investigation. When the EBSS asked for information, a servant of Celestia would descend into the very depths of Tartarus to scrounge the smallest scraps rather than return empty-hoofed. Stepping out of the archives, I took a deep breath of the mountain air, still cool from the night. I wondered where I was needed next. I had to realize I wasn't needed anywhere. That was a cold shower in itself, and as it washed over me, it left behind a feeling of emptiness I hadn't felt since I was but a useless delinquent so many decades ago. Pestering the clerks at the archives wouldn't make them work faster. As for New Page, I could not follow her into the university, nor was I supposed to. Lullaby was on shift watching the apartment all day. I had been given no other task, no project to work on, no investigation to continue, no elusive criminal to track down. I simply wasn't needed. The one stallion standing still among all the ponies rushing by. So this was Celestia's insult, the punishment for my failure at the mansion. I couldn't even be angry at her. I had to remain thankful for her not putting me on White Wolf. I believed in Celestia. I really did. But sometimes I hated her, and I hated her brave new Equestria. Perhaps the nightmare never completely left me after all. Impotent, undirected anger frothed inside me, until it broke free and I slammed a hoof at the pavement. Pain whipped my bones, and I felt a piece of my hoof chip off. I kicked it away and gave a hiss of pain. No pony even looked my way. In the end, I decided to pay an old friend a visit. I didn't like visiting Silhouette. Even in his death I felt like I was wasting his time. Although he came into my life late, by stomping right into it, and indeed, almost into my skull, over the few years I got to spend under his guidance, he had become like a father to me. What a disgrace it was that his headstone didn't even bear his real name. I placed a hoof onto the name of Black Spot. While the rest of Equestria thought the night guards were banished along with Nightmare Moon, we old dogs knew the truth. I'm not going to forget you, Silhouette. I let my hoof slide down, leaving a scratch.
I'm sorry.
He had changed my life that night, saved it, even. I wished he'd have come talk to me before deciding to end his own. I could have repaid the favor. I should have seen it in his eyes. I shouldn't have let him walk away. Why did I have to find River and not him? I never learned what he did during the longest night, but perhaps that was for the best. Not like it mattered now. Did it ever? A shadow above. A Pegasus flew by, New Page. I turned the other way and set my gaze on the ground by reflex. It took my mind a moment to process there was no way she could have recognized me. She seemed to be carrying something. A flower-adorned wreath, and perhaps more things in her bag. She settled a few rows underneath me. I adjusted myself to keep an eye on her without being obvious. I could still do that, though I wasn't as good as I had once been. Not without a magic mirror to help me. New Page cleaned the grave, tearing weeds and even stuffing some in her mouth to chew. It looked like she was in a hurry, or just wanted to be done as quickly as possible. Once the soil was clear, she lit a few tea lights and put up the wreath by the headstone. After a moment of contemplation, she turned her eyes to the sky. I cast my own gaze down. Though I wasn't looking, I heard the minute vibrations of the wind as she spread her wings and flew closer. She must have thought she was being subtle. Did I give myself away? She landed, and I pretended I didn't notice. Even with my back turned I could feel her staring. She cleared her throat. Don't you dare talk to me.
Excuse me, sir.
One of my ears perked, twisting in the direction of her voice. I didn't catch it in time. I tried to bring it back forward, slowly now, to make it seem I didn't care. A lump collected in my throat, one I couldn't swallow. I never got like this. I breathed in deep to control my nerves. Silhouette's simple headstone grew more and more interesting and intricate every passing second, or that's what I told myself. It felt better to focus on its little cracks, that patch of moss in a moldering corner, the fly rubbing its legs as it crept across Blackspot's name.
My name is New Page.
Her voice cut into my back like a knife, and every word was another twist on the blade. My hooves dug deeper into the dusty earth, stiff with barely contained tremors.
I study history at the university.
I know. Go away.
Forgive me, I do not mean to intrude.
You are. Go away.
But I couldn't help but notice the date on this headstone.
I ground my teeth again. Shut up, the words echoed in my mind. Shut up, shut up, shut up. I promised myself that I'd do this. I was not a coward. Yet I couldn't bear her presence, not like this. Without the mirror, without the veil of secrecy and lies, without the protection of the EBSS, I was just a wizened old stallion standing in a cemetery.
I was wondering if you would like to share your story.
My story. The memories washed over me, locking me in their suffocating embrace. I heard your mother scream as you died, New Page. Smoke billowed high into the dark sky, the bodies littered the ground, and pillars of flame danced in between. I could feel my mind slip, as it always did, slip back into the bottomless void, the endless sea of regret, the unforgiving visions of blood and ruptured flesh and desecrated bodies, and the laughter, oh, the cackling. No. I shut my eyes tight, blocking it out. Not now. A deep breath. Breathe out. Open your eyes. I turned my head, finally, to look New Page in the eye, face to face for the first time in a long time. I fought the urge to turn and run. She shrunk away at my stare. Am I that frightening? She scared me far more than I did her.
Leave me alone, lady,
I forced from my throat before turning forward. That was enough of that. She replied after a brief pause.
I meant no disrespect.
Another pause.
I apologize.
Her wings unfurled again, and she took off within the second, a little filly running from the bad stallion. I watched her ascend. She didn't look back. When she disappeared in the sprawls of the city above, all the tension inside me snapped free. I drove a hoof into the soil of Silhouette's grave, then another, then I pulled both up and stomped down again and again and again, pummeling, digging, trampling, breathing in the swelling dust through clenched teeth and muffled screams. Eventually, when my hooves throbbed with pain and muscles gave out in exhaustion, I let my legs go limp. I fell to the beaten soil, lying on the grave of the stallion who had saved me so long ago. I sneezed on the dust. My breaths gradually slowed. I looked up at the city again, and the late morning sun scorched my eyes. What are you doing to me? A World of Lies, Part 1. Princess Celestia. The elements of harmony channeled my desperation, and the sun rose with my fury to burn away the darkness. The nightmare was over. It had been I who had held back the army. I had ordered the royal guard to stand down. I had let the nightmare ravage Equestria, all in the hope that I might convince my sister to return to me. A foolish notion. I can see that now. The surviving senators cried to end the age of alicorns and reinstate the old order. My little ponies turned on me, painting me as the murderer of their children. And I believed them. Without Luna to guide me, I plunged into self-hatred and despair. It was my fault, all of it. I could not wash the blood from my hooves. The nobles argued. The ponies rioted. They broke through the exhausted royal guard, into the old castle, torches in their hooves and the names of the dead on their tongues. They forced me to flee, and as I flew across the heavens, I saw my beautiful Equestria tearing itself apart. Something broke inside of me. Because I knew better. Because I was meant to rule all the land. The fact that I persevered where my own sister had failed was proof enough. I refused to let the squabbling of nobles and the shrieking tantrums of spiteful children destroy my beautiful Equestria. As the chosen tyrant, their lives were rightfully mine to control as I saw fit. Yet I could not rule without a loyal force, and the royal guard would not be enough. Before the longest night, few ponies matched the night guards in their loyalty and devotion. When they awoke from the nightmare with equine flesh between their teeth, none matched them in guilt. Yet more terrifying than the pain of guilt was the silence. Without Luna to serve as a conduit between their souls, they could no longer sense one another. Their souls shivered alone in the cold, alone with the absence of Princess Luna and alone with the memories of the longest night. Each one cried out for redemption. I offered them atonement. I had the old castle and courtyard emptied, by any means necessary. I called all the night guards to see me. I presented a simple offer, to pay for their crimes with servitude to my rule, or be banished from Equestria forever under threat of death. I allowed them a night to decide. Of the 424 night guards who served under Princess Luna before the longest night, 356 survived that fateful night. Of the 311 still capable of labor, 290 accepted my offer. Silhouette became the first of 32 to attempt suicide, and the third of 21 to succeed. Every night guard had held a fragment of Luna's soul. I purged them with magic of my own. Each individual piece of Luna begged for mercy, each screamed in vain. They all burned with the cleansing fire of the sun, forced from their bodies to join Luna inside the moon. With every screaming night guard that I saved, it felt as though I murdered another piece of my sister. By the time I was done with them all, I no longer cared. As Luna's soul left them, their bodies receded to their original forms, simple ponies like any other. The night guard was so abolished, and the Equestrian Bureau for State Security rose in its place. Its solitary purpose, to stamp out all those who would stand against my rule. From the dirtiest worker in the field to the oldest members of the Senate, none were safe. A year in the crystal mines would break any spirit. 10. Any spine. The night guards were gone. No pony had seen them since the longest night, they hadn't because I willed it so. The EBSS quickly dealt with any who dared spread lies about citing them even after the breaking of dawn. Those who dared oppose me opposed Equestria itself, for I was Equestria, its rising sun and watchful moon, its peace and harmony, the dawn of a new day atop the ashes. In a century, I had abolished the Senate entirely. In another, there would be no pony to remember the time when I was not the sole ruler of the land. In a millennium, my little ponies would not have it any other way. It always amazed me, how quickly the common pony adapts, afraid at first, but never for long. In a matter of years, most learned to be content, even happy, with how things were. After all, things could not have been any other way. Just as long as you worked diligently to rebuild our broken Equestria, Equestria promised to be paradise again. In time, I managed to convince even myself. No, ponies were not afraid. I did not allow fear, for to fear was to doubt, and to doubt was to harm Equestria. What I had created was not a world of fear. I had made a world of lies. New page. It was a few days since I had talked to the strange stallion at the cemetery. There was nothing to him, and I didn't manage to coerce anything out of him, unlike Winters, who had been all but open. Even so, as I spent yet another night in the company of a book and a candle, I couldn't get myself to care for Winters. The more I thought about it, the hollower his words rang in my memory. What did I see in that guy? I could barely remember his face. Back in the tavern, though, he seemed captivating. Instead my mind wandered, incessantly and insistently, back to the old Pegasus by the headstone. Funny how that worked. I turned onto my belly, throwing Memoirs in the Night onto my pillow as my bed creaked underneath me. This one was an interesting piece, its author Silhouette had apparently been a night guard, and the book was a short collection of memories from his time spent serving Luna. Though he went out of his way to never refer to common ponies by their real names, he gladly included those of his comrades. Short as each section was, I found myself taking a certain liking to the night guards. Silhouette didn't see his own kind as the monsters oft talked about by other ponies. They were more like a ragtag bunch of misfits, forged in service, their imperfections hammered away by Luna's guidance. I couldn't help but sympathize with Dusk and Cavern's quest to escape a haughty noble's wrath. I pumped my hoof in excitement when Crimson Cascade caught the thief of 2nd Street. I felt for Crescent Strike when a self-important mare besmirched their order. There was no sign of the bloodthirsty madness that would overcome them in the longest night. Silhouette's apparent skill as an author alone indicated that the night guards were far more than any pony gave them credit for. No surprise, I suppose, given their backgrounds. They all had something to prove. No wonder why Celestia wanted this buried. I could easily see why a book that has you see the equine face of the night guards would be considered dangerous. They were scapegoats, the lot of them. Celestia marked them as monsters and directed our hate towards them, and had us praise her for banishing them into the moon. All the less time spent tarnishing the name of her sister. The apartment's door rattled, sending metallic clangs across every room. I didn't pay attention to it, it did that, especially on windy nights. But then it rattled again, and I heard the handle clack and turn. I got up as quietly as I could, stepping onto the carpet to make less noise, all the while doing my best to avoid the discarded scraps of paper and scrolls. From above my bed, I took the candle holder off its hoist. I was afraid to peek around the door. Could it have been a burglar, or worse, the EBSS? I felt like if it was the latter, the best thing would be to turn tail and fly out the window.
Paige?
Asked a familiar voice.
It's me. Flora.
I let out a frustrated sigh around the candle holder, turning out of my room.
You nearly gave me a heart attack, you.
I recoiled with a yelp, almost dropping the candle. At the door stood a mare I didn't recognize, a cloak over her back and a hood covering her eyes. She threw her hood back, closing the door with a hind leg.
It's fine, it's fine.
Her horn glowed red, and a tuft of magic yanked the candle holder from my mouth, bringing it close to her face. Her coat was dark blue, and an unkempt white mane draped over her eyes. I recognized Flora Dawn's ornate amulet around her neck. She smiled.
I dyed myself. Wow.
I looked her up and down.
Got bored of pink. Light red. And yes. Should I be concerned? No, not at all.
She rubbed the back of her neck.
All right, maybe. Well, it depends. Some things come up. You want me to help? I do. And this can't possibly wait. It can't.
I rolled my eyes, turning back into my room.
All right, I'm listening.
Flora followed with light steps.
You said you don't want to go back to the archives.
I hopped onto my bed, leaning my back against the wall.
Yeah, no. We respect that.
She sat down next to me.
But we just found out about something that, it seems only you can help us with. We need you, and we need you quickly. Don't you ever?
I asked, raising a brow. She leaned close, putting her hooves on my shoulders.
I'm not reaching when I say that everything's at stake. Everything we've been working on, everything you ever did for us, it will all have been for nothing if you don't help us here.
She took her hooves off.
I'm very sorry to throw it on you like this, but this is a sudden development.
I scooted the other way.
Look, I don't know about this we you keep referring to. You know I never cared for your whatever it is you're doing. I steal books, you give books. That was the deal, no more. All I want is to find out why I'm having the dreams. Nightmare Moon in Chains.
I nodded. She pressed a smirk in my face.
What if I told you that I know some pony who might have the answer?
I pushed her nose away.
Then I'd call you a liar.
She leaned back at the wall, crossing her hooves.
When did you get like this, Paige? You were my best friend. Then you ran away and I didn't see you for 10 years.
I crossed my hooves too, turning the other way to stare at a dark corner of the room.
We thought you had died. Like you fell off a cliff, or got caught by some animal in the woods. I cried, Flora. Took me a month to recover. And then you show up at my apartment like nothing happened, babbling something about this mysterious we.
I turned back to her.
I'm sorry if I have reservations.
She poked a playful hoof at my side.
Must be even some convincing babbling, seeing how quickly you signed up.
I pursed my lips, looking down.
You want me to go back there? This is the last thing we'll ever need from you.
Though I wasn't looking, I heard the bed creak as she crawled closer, and I felt the warmth of her chest against my side.
Look. I know you don't like it. No pony does. But I promise, this is the last thing. You say that every time.
I shook her off.
Even if it were true this time, I'm no closer to an answer for my dreams. I'll have achieved nothing, except playing the chances for banishment. Or worse. Oh, but you've done a lot. In fact, with all the information you've collected, we've managed to find out a few things about your nightmares.
I twiddled the tips of my hooves, refusing to turn to her.
So you've been using me, even though you knew what I wanted to know. You're not helping your case here. We didn't know. Not until recently.
I shook my head.
Okay, Paige. Look at me. Look me in the eyes. Please.
I turned to her with a sigh. She cupped one of my hooves between two of hers, raising it between us.
I'm sorry.
And I saw sincerity in her eye that she could not have faked. In her gaze, I found memories. We've been here once before.
Remember when we got lost in the woods?
She asked. Oh, how could I forget? Out in the scary wilderness, the forest enveloping us, the sounds of wolves scampering just above the next cliff, the pain in my dislocated wing, such an experience leaves a mark in an 8-year-old.
It was your fault, you know.
I grumbled.
It was, wasn't it? But you led us home. I need you again, Paige.
She squeezed my hoof tighter.
Come on. One last adventure. I will tell you everything we've learned.
I pondered for a moment. By the time I noticed the grin creeping up my cheeks, it was too late. I put my other hoof onto her grasp and squeezed back.
All right. One final run. Ha.
She hopped from the bed, trampling the parchments on the floor.
Well then, no time to waste. Let's go. Wait, right now.
She cast me a confused glare before responding.
Oh, we're not going to the archives tonight. There's something else you need to see before we set this up. Oh.
I got up as well.
What is it? I think it's about time you met us.
Floridon led the way through the night. Not down the gas-lit streets, but down steep cliffs not meant to be traveled, across the darkest back alleys, and through gardens and courtyards of nobles and workers alike. With her guidance, we avoided the watchful eyes of the royal guards ever above. Clearly, she had been doing this for a while. Though I could not put a hoof on where we were going, it appeared we took needless turns going in zigzag or in circles outright, passing the same spire multiple times before moving on. Flora barely ever stopped and never turned back, and I couldn't match her boundless energy to talk and gallop at the same time. In the end, she made a sharp stop under a noble's hanging garden. It arced over an alley to connect one spire to the next. She put out a hoof in front of me and placed the tip of another on her lips.
SSH. What's going on?
I panted, trying to keep my voice down.
Why are we?
She put her hoof on my mouth, cocking her head upwards.
We're being followed. What, like the EBSS? They've been dogging me for a while. He's got to be alone, else he'd have jumped us already. He thinks I haven't noticed.
I looked back into the moonlit street, frantically searching the shadows for prying eyes.
So what now? We'll lose him up ahead.
She pointed towards a building whose bright pink logo cheerfully advertised the Gemstone Beauty Saloon.
You round it to the right, I'll go left. There's an entrance to an empty canal there, totally underground, never used. What, where the kids go to pee?
She smacked me on the head.
Way better than what those guys will do to you, trust me.
I sighed in resignation.
All right. So when?
A wolf's howl pierced the silence of the night, resonating across the streets and bouncing between the spires. I frantically turned my head up. Several stories high, atop the crest of a noble's tower, I saw a wolf, its bright fur silhouetted against the starry sky. How in Equestria? As the last echoes of the howl died down, I heard a muffled "what they?" from the hanging garden above. That was when Flora bolted from the shadow of the arch, and I followed without thinking. She ran quickly, quicker than I had ever seen a pony run. My legs could barely keep up. She ran around the saloon to the right, and I skipped over the fence to the left. The lights of the city around me bled together into a single smudge as I rounded the circular wall of the building. On the other side, Flora came galloping towards me. She jumped in the air and pointed her horn down, sending one red flash of light at a maintenance hatch. The padlock came undone, red-hot and sizzling even as Flora threw the cover off. She stuffed me down the hole and came hopping after me, pulling the hatch to cover the hole. With one last metallic clang, the cover fell into place and blocked out the last ray of moonlight from the outside.
Phew,
Flora huffed. A spark of red light appeared at the tip of her horn, casting its glow on the nearby walls.
That was close.
I eyed the hatch uneasily, or what I could make out of it.
You reckon he saw us come in here? Let's not wait to find out. Come on.
The tunnel was rather narrow, fitting maybe for a pony and a half. It quickly came to a fork. Flora led the way through the dank maze of mold and dust, pointing out any odd-looking puddles or leakages on the walls before I came to them.
What is this place, anyway?
I asked.
They connect to the rivers higher on the mountain,
Flora replied.
They're going to feed fountains or whatever with them. The point is they're not doing anything right now.
We stopped every once in a while to listen for the sound of hooves, but nothing came. As far as we could tell, there was no pony coming after us. Whether that came down to our brilliant escape or their disgust for cramped, wet spaces was any pony's guess. After a few more minutes of treading in silence and passing by one too many exits to the surface, I realized she really wasn't going to talk about the obvious. Seems like I'll need to take a metaphorical pair of pliers to her mouth again to get anything from her. For my own benefit, as if.
So, that wolf. Don't know, don't care. We got away, that's what's important. You're really not earning my trust here.
I'd have continued that line of inquiry, had I not seen light again, light that didn't come from Flora's horn. Our path came to the end as the tunnel led directly out to the mountainside. Had there been any water flowing here, it would have cascaded right down into the depths. Flora stuck her head out. Finding the coast clear, she hopped right out and began climbing the rocks. I thanked the powers that be for gifting me with wings. Coming above the mountain sill at the edge of the city, we surfaced at the private residence of a noble that overlooked the depths below. It appeared to be the only one around. By the look of it, it was among the oldest buildings of Canterlot, likely made hastily before they decided these cliffs were unable to support the large structures that most nobles demanded. The place, though large by any commoner's standards, or mine anyway, was nothing to brag about in the upper circles. A courtyard surrounded the structure, blocked from the rest of the city by a stone wall taller than a pony. Rearing on my hind hooves, I could just barely make out the silhouette of the mansion's roof against the starry sky. The unlit courtyard reeked of flowers and freshly cut grass. Normally I wasn't much for flowers, but by goodness was it better than the damp smells of that maintenance tunnel. Along the path, snaking from the main entrance to the gates, I saw statues of unicorns rearing and pointing to the sky, their various orifices spewing water that twinkled in the moonlight. Or was it wine? Flora skipped over the fence with surprising ease. I used my wings to hop over. She ran quickly to the entrance of the mansion. The door opened before we got to it. In the dark anteroom a pale, old stallion held the door for us. Flora walked in without looking at him. I cast him a glance and greeted him cautiously, "Hello." He stared blankly forward, responding only by closing the door behind us. I leaned to whisper in Flora's ear, "Who's that?" She glanced at him.
"Oh, he's just the butler."
I kept staring at this butler, but he didn't budge and rarely blinked. He sat by the door entirely still, his eyes never wavering from the nothing in front of him.
"Is he okay?"
Flora smiled, hanging her cloak.
"He's always like that. Nothing you should be concerned about."
She kept her red amulet on.
"He's giving me the creeps."
The anteroom was wide but unlit, and I detected the faint scent of incense wafting in the air. Listening, I heard voices, or mumbled whispers, "Really?"
"In fact," I added, "this whole thing is giving me the creeps."
She patted me on the head, ruffling my mane.
"Ponies are always a little scared at first. But don't worry, you'll soon realize there is nothing to fear. Really, to us, you're something of an idol."
I didn't know whether to laugh off that remark as a joke or to be concerned about what I got myself into.
"Well, consider my curiosity piqued. Just be yourself,
Flora said.
They're going to love you, and...
She cocked her head, raising her brows at something behind my back. From behind an empty doorway peeked a small colt. He let his jaw hang agape as he looked at Flora, then turned to me. His eyes went wide when our gazes met, and a frightened gasp fell from his lips. He turned with a little hop, his tiny hooves clopping as he ran off.
Tisk. Discovered,
said Flora.
So much for a dramatic entrance. I hoped we could surprise them. Who exactly am I meeting, again? More ponies like me. Ponies who are free. Come on.
We walked through the doorway into the dim room beyond, following the waning sound of little hooves and hushed words across the hallways. From the inside, the mansion appeared larger than I'd have guessed. Wide rooms opened into one another, lit by the occasional candle at the corner, their walls adorned by great vistas or paintings of great events in equestrian history. Door frames had been carved into intricate works of art, slender ponies with both wings and horns greeted us every time we walked past. Depictions of the sun and the moon in a swirling sea of stars filled the ceilings to create one continuous skyline, while the carpets had all been embroidered with pictures of marching Pegasus armies across conquered lands. Above, a private slice of the heavens, at our hooves, the steps of the many who came before. Passing a few rooms, we reached what I took to be the inner sanctum of the mansion. From behind a half-opened door seeped out a stream of dancing firelight, its warm reddish glow bringing color to the shadows of the hallway.
They must be on their way,
said a stallion's voice.
By the moon above, what do we say?
Mumbled a nervous mare.
See, come here, Zeus, sit in my lap and be a good boy. Don't bring shame on us.
I sent Flora a look. She turned to me with a cheeky grin.
Sounds to me they're excited to meet you.
She pulled the door open, stepping aside. At once the room fell silent, and the smell of incense washed over us. A dozen stares greeted me. Flora cocked her head and batted her eyebrows at me. I stepped in with an uneasy gulp. A fireplace crackled set against the wall, its warmth filling the room and its light breaking against the thick curtain that covered the wide window. There was no carpet here, the parquet lay bare and bore the scratches of many a hoof. Or rather, it wasn't bare, a great, deep blue circle whose edge touched the base of each wall had been painted onto the floor. The points of a wide, six-pronged star touched the inner edge of the circle, and the star's lines were accompanied by even more runes and strange shapes. The walls were white, lacking the pompous decoration that defined the rest of the building. The only thing to adorn them were straight lines, one shooting out of each point of the star, crawling up the wall to come together in a single point on the ceiling. The lines reminded me of the bars of a cell. A stallion sat in the center of the star, his back to the fireplace. He couldn't have been much older than me. The other ponies sat in front of him on an assortment of wide pillows, stools, or simply on the floor, incense sticks smoldering around them in scattered trays. I saw a pair of them sharing a bottle of wine with no glasses in sight. A small group huddled around a single mare with a deck of fanciful cards laid out before her, the kind that old hags at the market used to dispense predictions and promise good fortunes in exchange for your bits. The rest sat closer to the stallion in the center, like children awaiting the tale of their grandfather. Among them was a teenage filly with the colt from earlier hiding behind her legs. Indeed, the word children seemed most apt, as most of the ponies in the room appeared younger than me, ranging from early to late teens. Apart from the little colt, the only other exception was an old, wrinkled unicorn who rested in a comfortable-looking armchair farther back, chewing a pipe in his mouth as he eyed me up and down. The stallion in the center turned to us. He gave a welcoming smile and began slowly clapping his hooves. After a second or two, the others caught on. In a moment, the entire room resounded with the sound of hooves. The teen filly with the colt grabbed the little one's hooves and clapped them for him. Of all the things I expected, this certainly wasn't among of them.
Hello.
The stallion in the center lifted a hoof to the others, to which the clapping stopped. He stood up and came to take my hoof. I shook on it instinctively, only for him to pull my hoof closer and plant a kiss on it before letting go.
It's a pleasure to meet you, new page, he said.
The room had been pretty cozy to begin with, but now it was getting uncomfortably warm. I fanned my head a little.
Stars, I'm glad to meet you as well. And you,
the stallion said and stepped up to Flora, giving her hoof a firm, two-hoofed shake.
You're so late. We were starting to worry.
The filly with the colt got up, the little one skipping behind her to peek at me with wide eyes.
Oh Nix, don't listen to Keen,
the filly said.
He's always wearing his old drama pants. We knew you would make it.
What did she just call Flora?
Getting around is harder and harder these days, said Flora.
Nix.
But yes, we made it. All in one piece, no dogs on our tail. Is she the progeny?
Asked the little colt, pointing a tiny hoof at me. A round of gasps and whispers washed over the congregation. The stallion, Keen, cleared his throat.
Now, every pony calm down.
He bent down to the colt, who quickly hid his eyes behind the filly's leg. The filly, in turn, nudged him forward.
You've asked a question, boy,
she said.
Don't you want to hear the answer? Her name is New Page,
Klein said to the colt.
She is very smart and very kind and you needn't fear her in the slightest. That is all you need to know.
While the filly and Keen soothed the child, I leaned closer to Flora.
What's with the names? And what was it he called me? It's not important right now,
she whispered back. I elbowed her side.
It is important. Excuse me,
Keen cut in.
Something wrong.
Flora spoke before I could.
Paige is simply unsure why she's here. I don't think we've introduced ourselves.
Keen slapped his forehead.
Of course. How rude of us.
He bowed his head before me.
You might have gathered that my name is Keen. Soon to be Priest Keen, in fact.
Priest?
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Flora walked beside Keen and turned to me, knocking a hoof on his chest.
Keen is like a brother to me. But really, we're all a big family here.
She motioned towards the other ponies in the room, the filly with the colt, and all the other young mares and stallions looking eagerly at me.
Among us, my name is Nix.
She took a deep breath, then let loose a relieved sigh.
It feels so good to say that in front of you, Paige. Hello, my name is Priestess Nix.
Yes, said the teen filly, skipping up to me. In her eyes I saw the excited eagerness of a child not fully in understanding of the world. Though her grin shone with admiration, I couldn't help but feel unnerved by her.
And my name's Winzig.
She reached for the colt, not taking her eyes off me for a second, nudging him over.
And he's little Zeus right here. Say hi, Zeus.
The colt just rushed to hide behind Winzig's legs again.
He's lovely once you get to know him,
she chortled.
Oh, I'm sure,
I said with a forced giggle.
Forgive me, I'm still not sure why I'm here.
One of the wine drinkers got up.
Did you really break into the archives? What?
I couldn't believe Flora would so recklessly flaunt that. Why'd she tell all these ponies? The other wine pony stood up.
I heard you've known Nix since you were kids, is that true?
The mare with the cards hopped up and pushed in front.
Yes. What was it like, growing up with her? Hey now,
said Flora, stepping up protectively.
Every pony calm D.
A stallion barely younger than me butted her out of the way, leaning in.
Can you really see the nightmare in your dreams? Do you always sense her?
Asked another.
Have you ever talked to her? Has she ever talked to you? What did she say?
They gathered around me, inching closer with every word, smothering me with their questions and eager, starry stares. It was like they weren't even ponies anymore, but starved beasts who had happened upon fresh meat, except they craved my mind's contents rather than my body's.
That's enough,
said a rough voice in the back, making all the others fall silent. Every pony turned their heads towards the old unicorn in the armchair. He chewed his pipe, flicking it to the other corner of his lips with a twitch of his tongue. He drew on it deeply. Then he spat the pipe out, his magic floating it right in front of him, and shook his head, smoke pouring from his mouth and nose as he sighed. His gaze passed over every pony, inside, skipping only me.
That's better,
he said.
I can hear myself think.
He bit on his pipe, then stood up, groaning quietly as his old bones helped him up. He dragged one of his hooves as he limped closer to me, the children around us backed away and dispersed to give him space.
You've probably noticed,
he said,
that you have something of a reputation here. Nix has spoken much about you.
He sent her a nod, then offered me a hoof.
Now then, you look like the kind of mare who prefers a hoof shake over kisses.
As I took his hoof, I saw Keen look away for a moment.
My name is Star Call Comet the Third of House Ori Glow, and this is my home.
He drew on his pipe, then quickly turned away to cough into a hoof.
Excuse me. The curses of old age,
He smiled.
Now, that is the name I was born with. Here, my name is simply Schweigen, and I am not an inkling more or less noble than any of us.
He sent the others a quick look.
Though my manners might be a touch more refined. A blessing of old age.
Ori Glow. I figured his features were familiar. Though not the richest noble house out there, they were by far the most, for lack of a better term, promiscuous. Ties of marriage bound the Ori to practically every other house on at least one thread. For Flora and her little friends, it certainly made sense to use fake names. An Ori, however, could have fooled very few indeed. Though I would never have guessed that little Flora had friends in such high places. Evidently there was more to her ragtag bunch than I had thought.
An honor to meet you, sir. The honor is all mine, he responded. Please, no sir. Tonight, I am merely Schweigen.
I nodded.
Very well, Schweigen.
Keen clapped a hoof on his shoulder.
And that's why we all adore him. As modest as he is wise. Prophet Nye's right hoof, we call him.
Schweigen chuckled.
That honor belongs to our lovely Nyx, I believe. Yes, I said, she's been very, helpful to me. In fact, she's called me here to perform some sort of job, I believe.
I gave her a look.
Although I'm not sure who this Prophet Nye person is. He's only the most amazing stallion you'll ever meet, said Flora. She slowly turned away, looking up at nothing as her eyes shone with the glow of admiration. Or infatuation, more like. Keen turned the other way while scratching the back of his neck, and the kids giggled quietly. Schweigen sent them a stern glare. Flora shook her head. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Nye is. He guides us. And he, well. He saved me. She hung her head. Keen nuzzled her. It was Nye who found her. You know I ran away, said Flora, voice wavering. Mum and Dad, they moved to Hortsmouth to get away from the world after the longest night. Don't know what they left behind, but I don't think they ever wanted me, Paige. Dad beat me. Mum didn't care. You were the only reason I didn't run away sooner than I did. She sighed. I was just a little filly lost in the country, but I might as well have been a rat. She sniffed and dragged the back of a hoof across her nostrils. I learned to beg. I learned to steal. After some noble's kid practiced his archery on me one day, I learned to stay out of sight. Wow, I said. Flora, I didn't know. She took a deep breath to collect herself. That ironed her voice a little. It was in Coldhagen, I think. Big city, you know, plenty of places to hide. I must have been, like 13. I quickly learned my way around the back alleys, and there was this ancient sawmill on the outskirts, completely trashed and abandoned. That's where I'd go to sleep. It was fine for a while. Then one night, I began hearing sounds. The other kids gathered around us, dragging their pillows and stools closer. By the looks they gave her, I could tell some of these kids have been there themselves. Flora puffed her chest and gave them a brave smile. She seemed to enjoy telling ponies the story for the first time. I thought some pony had found me, she continued. I was helpless, and I didn't want to imagine what they might do to me. Hooves clopping, sneaking, just out of sight, you know? I was terrified. I jumped out the window onto a pile of rotting logs. Sprained an ankle. But I didn't care, I just ran all the way to the city. Didn't return until the next morning. And you know what I found? The kids leaned closer, their ears perked forward. Schweigen and Keen exchanged a smile. I found a pile of food wrapped in a blanket. She looked up, again with that dreamy look. And that night, Prophet Nye came to me. I just had to take one look at him, and all of my fears, they simply vanished. He offered me a place to stay. If it had been any pony else, I'm sure I'd have said no. But Nye. There's no pony under the moon and stars who can say no to Nye. The kids passed around nods and smiles, though a few of them looked worried. Flora booped the nose of a concerned-looking kid, winking. He didn't take advantage of me. All he did was talk. He told there was a family waiting for me.
She wiped a tear away, stepping closer to the kids, and spread out her hooves for a collective hug.
We're all one family here. And they call me melodramatic,
mumbled Keen, turning to me.
Ah, she drums it up, but she isn't wrong. Prophet Nai is truly exceptional.
After a round of hugs, Flora sat down with the other kids, nodding at Keen.
So go on, then. Tell the story.
He sighed.
I'm actually of noble blood.
I raised a brow.
Oh. Yes,
he said.
House Talltree, I think. Nix told us you study history, so you might know what happened to us.
I needed a moment to search my memory. Talltree does sound familiar.
Celestia ousted them from the Senate right after the longest night. They had been most vocal about reinstating the old order, without Alicorns. We lost everything,
Keen went on.
I was just a toddler then, of course. Didn't learn about it until I was 10. My parents, they gave me away to some backwards, farming family. I might be noble by blood, but I've always been just a regular worker. I've worked on that apple orchard since I could remember. All my life I've been told, work harder, Celestia says so. I had never seen her, I had no idea who she was, only that she knew when I didn't work hard enough.
He sat down and grabbed one of his fetlocks, circling it around and making the joint pop.
And did I work hard? When I was very little, I genuinely believed Celestia was always watching me. I'd look up to the sky and talk to the sun, to her, reassuring her that I was doing my job. I got obsessed with making her proud.
He started to chuckle, but it quickly turned into one long, weary sigh.
I grew out of it, eventually. It wasn't until one day when I had to deliver a batch of apples to Canterlot that I really grew up. It was years ago, the city wasn't even half this size then. But even so.
He rubbed the back of his neck and searched the wall for words.
I mean, I sort of knew who Celestia was, but only when I saw her looking down from the palace balcony did it dawn on me. Her eyes passed right through me, past that enormous cart, didn't even linger a second. Because Celestia never really watched me work. She didn't even know I existed. After that, well, I never went back to the farm. He made a living working temporary jobs,
Schweigen interjected.
You've spent a month plastering the walls of the palace, haven't you? And I hated every second of it,
Keen said.
It wasn't long until Prophet Nai found me. He has an eye for troubled youth.
I turned to Schweigen, expecting another lengthy tale. It must have been quite something, I figured, as he wasn't young and neither did he seem particularly troubled.
Oh, quit staring,
he said. I thought I saw his cheeks flush red. He drew on his pipe before continuing, his words coming out in clouds of smoke.
I don't have such a story to tell. Nai is close to my heart, though. Is that so?
I asked. Schweigen shrugged and blew out the last waft of smoke from his lungs.
He is my son. The only thing I have left since the longest night.
His eyes danced across the walls.
Well, the only thing I care for. See, Paige?
Asked Flora.
I wanted you to know who we are. We're ponies just like you or any pony else. 'Cause when you think about it, haven't all our lives been racked by the longest night?
I couldn't help but think about Papa.
All of Equestria was.
She walked to the middle of the room, a stool sliding over to her in a red envelope of magic. She quickly hopped on top of it and reared on her hind hooves.
And now Celestia sits on the throne of this rotting world, she preached. Think how different all our lives would have been if Princess Luna were still among us.
She slowly put her hooves down, the stool tipped forwards but did not fall over.
Luna would never have let her sister become the unyielding tyrant she is.
Aeon, that's it, I said to myself. I'm going to the mines, I just know it. Flora leaned back, making the stool tip the other way.
Prophet Nai says it best, had it not been for the cataclysmic betrayal of Princess Luna, Equestria would still be paradise. And if she were to return, all would be set right in the world.
She hopped to me, sending the stool falling the other way.
This is who we are, she said. We are, all of us, the children of the longest night.
The room erupted in applause again. Schweigen nodded with a proud smile, and I saw Keen wipe a tear from his eye.
May the mother return,
Flora proclaimed.
May she return,
repeated the teens all at once. So I've been working for a damned cult of lunatics all this time. Figures.
Please,
I said and tugged Flora's side.
Let's just get this over with. You know what I want, answers to my dreams. That's it.
Seeing the suspicious glances cast my way by the others, I took a cautious step back.
No offense, but I'm fine living in this rotting world.
I gulped. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say.
For now, at least. Look, Flora, I'm here to do a job. Let me see this knight. You're going to,
she replied.
He should be right upstairs, just a little bit busy. Working out the details of your job, actually. He said he'd call for us when he's ready to see you. He's done, actually,
said Keen. Flora's ears perked and she skipped over to him. She leaned on her front legs as she looked into his face.
Well, why didn't you say so? We've no time to waste, Paige needs to.
Schweigen put a hoof against Flora's nose and pushed her down.
I came down not long before you arrived and told us to escort new Paige upstairs when she comes. Except we've had an unexpected guest right after that.
Flora gave him a confused stare.
What kind of guest? He called himself Sunbeam Giggle Snark.
Schweigen raised his brow.
Yes, bit of a joker, he was.
Keen put up a hoof.
But the butler let him in, so we knew it was safe.
Schweigen nodded.
Indeed. That, and Nye told us he had been expecting him, just that not tonight of all times. He asked not to be disturbed, and well, they haven't come downstairs since.
Flora's face flushed red as she chewed her lower lip.
Okay, so first off, I don't care who this jester thinks he is, Paige is more important, and second of all, you can't just let any pony waltz up tonight and distract him from.
She paused for a breath, she drew in sharply, then threw her head back with an exasperated groan.
Okay,
she continued.
Paige, every pony, I'm sorry about this. I think Schweigen, Klein, and I have some, shall we say, in-house policy to review.
She grabbed Keen by the nape and dragged him out of the room.
Come on, Schweigen.
Going by their faces, the teens felt just as awkward as I did in that moment. Leaving the room, Schweigen turned back.
Try not to eat new Paige alive, would you, children?
He said before a red aura around the knob slammed the door shut. I was kind of afraid to look at the others after that. Turns out my fears were unfounded, be it the scene that played out or Schweigen's scolding words, the children didn't seem at all interested in me now. As I looked at them, I saw each of them quickly avert their eyes and distract themselves with whatever they had. They went back to their wine and cards and the rest, or at least they pretended to as long as I was looking. I sat down by the window, poking my muzzle past the curtain to look at the night sky and the mare in the moon. I wondered if she'd be more honored or offended to have these ponies worship her with such fervor. Could such admiration have helped prevent the catastrophe, or would they have only worsened it?
Sorry,
came a quiet voice. I turned to see Winzig and the little Zeus behind her.
Sorry what?
I asked.
Well I kinda got overexcited, jumping on you like that. And, well, I think I started the avalanche. It's alright,
I said. Her eyes lit up.
Really? Of course. Every pony gets excited sometimes.
I could tell she tried to control her grin, but she couldn't. Once again she became a filly before heart swarming, with eyes shining and giggle barely contained. She extended a hoof.
I'm Winzig, by the way. I mean, I think I've already said that, but, in case you forgot.
I shook her hoof. Looking at her, she seemed even younger than I'd have previously guessed. 13, maybe, or 14 at most. On the side of her forehead, hidden beneath her unkempt bangs, I noticed a scar of some sort, or more like a burn wound. I couldn't exactly make it out, though.
So, what's your story?
I asked, taking a glance at the little colt behind her. He quickly cowered behind Winzig, ears pinned.
You aren't his sister, are you?
She hung her head, then shook it slowly.
Well,
she whispered,
every pony gets excited sometimes, right?
When she looked up, I saw a forced smile under a pair of bitter eyes. She grabbed Zeus and sat him in her lap, kissing the top of his head.
I love him, though. Love him to bits. I mean, this whole moon thing.
She leaned closer.
Don't tell any pony, but I'm not much into it. But their family.
She bounced Zeus a little.
Our family. I don't know what I'd have done if Keen hadn't found us. Good on him for his initiation. He deserves everything he gets. Initiation. Yes, she said, Keen is being initiated into Nai's inner circle. He's becoming a priest. That's why we're all here, really.
She waved a hoof across the room.
All of us ponies Keen found. I've only known some of them for a few weeks, but we're all a family. Where does Nai fit into this family? For all that talk, he doesn't seem to spend much time with you down here. Nai is,
She stroked her chin.
Nai is busy. I think. I've only met him once. A lot of us have only met him once. But it's okay, I mean, Celestia's dogs are hounding him, the bastards. That's why he has the priests and priestesses all around Equestria to help spread his message.
I cocked my head.
What message?
She looked over both her shoulders before turning to me with a conspiratorial grin.
Keen told me. He told me Nai is convinced Luna will come back soon. And she's going to need us ponies to welcome her. And you believe that?
She shrugged.
I'll believe anything, me.
As we talked, I couldn't help but stare at the scar on her forehead. She must have caught me trying to squint past her bangs. She lifted a hoof to brush her mane out of the way. On her forehead was not the mark of some accident, but something deliberate. Her hairless, burnt skin bulged in the form of a crescent moon.
Not much into it, hey?
I asked. She shrugged.
It's stylish. Needle pins. I mean, DF does them.
I raised a brow.
I've been meaning to ask. What's with the names? They symbolize we're all equal in the family,
she said, a bit too quickly. Must be a line she had heard enough times to stick verbatim.
Don't you want a name? I think I'll pass.
Seeing her smile falter, I patted her shoulder.
Hey, maybe later.
As I touched Twinzig, Zeus pulled his neck in and cowered in his mother's lap. I bent down to him.
Hey,
I whispered.
It's okay, it's okay. I'm a friend.
See? I mustered the widest smile I could. By the stars, am I terrible with children?
Are you scared?
Zeus nodded.
Big, scary world out there, isn't it?
He nodded again, tucking his head under Winzig's leg.
You know,
I said,
I didn't have a papa either.
To that, his ears perked.
Yeah. I know how scary it can be. But don't be afraid. You need to be strong and brave for your mama. Hey, you're a big, strong stallion, aren't you?
His expression seemed to ease up, and I detected the faintest hint of a smile. I heard the door open. Flora marched straight for me, horn lighting up and a red tuft of magic pulling at my side.
It's settled,
she said.
Come on. We're going upstairs. Whoever Giggle Snark thinks he is.
She made a face as she said that name.
You are more important. Wait,
I said,
are you so? Yes,
she cut in.
Move it.
Her magic dragged me outside, much to the protest of Schweigen and Keen. She took me up the stairs, visibly frustrated. The upstairs hallway branched two ways, both equally dark, lit dimly by but a few candles hoisted in the walls here and there. Though their light let me see a few hanging paintings and loose draperies, I could not appreciate the decoration here as I did downstairs. Not just because of the darkness, but because of the troubling sounds of argument down one way.
Who do you think you are?
Resounded a deep, booming voice from a closed door at the end of the hallway. By the anger in Flora's eyes, that was not Nai.
Do you honestly think she'll listen to you? To you?
Flora prodded my side, nudging me along. I really didn't feel like interrupting whatever was going on in there.
It's going to work,
said another, much lighter and wavering voice.
I've got it all figured out. We just need one fragment to reignite the spark of harmony in her heart. A fake will never work. And you're only going to use a single one, too. Even 6 barely stopped her. It'll agitate her at most. And then she'll draw out your death as long as she can.
We stopped before the door. Flora sent me a look, putting the tip of her hoof on her mouth and cupping an ear against the door.
It is a possibility, said the lighter voice, but it's why I want you there. If 2 of her children You have me risk my life calling me into the middle of the city, and this is why? You do know the dogs are sniffing for me. I admit, it is an ambitious plan. But we will pull through, I can sense it. Even you can't see the future.
He scoffed.
Some profit. Look. My children will be ready when the time comes. The question is if you'll be there to help us. Your incompetent children? The ones who were tailed halfway across the city? The ones I had to save just so they could come see you.
There was silence for a moment.
EBSS.
I leaned to whisper in Flora's ear.
What's he talking about? That wolf.
Flora just waved a hoof, pressing her ear harder against the door.
You should know to expect as much, said the deep voice, when you're running your entire operation out of Celestia's kennel. Did you see the dog's face?
Asked the lighter one.
No,
replied the deep voice.
Even I know better than to start a fight here. Consider this a gift. Now stop wasting my time with your insanity. No, wait.
Called the other voice, frantic.
Look. Look at me. If you only saw things my way. Did you just try the eyes on me?
There came a primal growl, almost like that of some animal.
What? No.
The sound of steps, one set of lighter hooves stumbling backwards, and heavy stomps following and getting heavier with every step.
Yes. I did, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, I mess.
His words broke into a scream as something roared. A crash followed amidst sounds of struggle and pained cries. Flora tore the door open and rushed inside while I stood stunned at the doorstep. There lay a white pony, winter mist. Whimpering and crumpled atop a broken desk, and a tremendous white wolf standing over him. A single paw, almost the size of my head, pinned Wintermist's chest down as the wolf silenced him by ripping his throat apart. The wolf then raised its head, turning his eyes at us.
How dare you!
Screamed Flora, her horn and amulet glowing red in unison.
Get off him this instant, or I'll splatter you on the walls.
Winters thrashed and twitched. He turned his head towards us as he grasped to his torn throat with one hoof, gurgling unintelligibly. I heard the others rush up the stairs from below. The wolf stared at Flora for a moment, leaning his head forward as his nose sniffed the air. He then looked at me, sniffed in my direction, and stepped back, taking his paw off Winters. I glanced to the side for a second. I was afraid to look away for any longer, and saw Keen coming to meet us at the door, Schweigen hobbling behind him as quickly as he could. By the time I turned back, Flora had already rushed to Winters and taken his twitching body into her hooves. The others, too, ran past me into the room. As for me, the only movement I made was a step backwards. The wolf's black, beady eyes were still set on me, staring into me, paralyzing me. A shiver ran down the wolf's spine. It sat down, its muscles tensing and relaxing seemingly at random, and is it getting smaller? The wolf shrunk, its white fur retreating into its skin, leaving behind a short coat of black. Its claws stuck together, and under the skin of the wolf's visage I saw tendons rippling and bone shifting with audible snaps and pops. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, looking on in disbelief as the wolf turned into a stallion right before me. Stranger still, perhaps, was that none of the others seemed to be fazed at all. Schweigen and Flora dragged Winters away while Keen stood between them and the now pony. Although no longer as gigantic as the wolf had been, this stallion still sported an intimidating stature. His charcoal coat contrasted his white mane, and his eyes bore little more emotion than the wolf's had. He held his chin high and stared down Keen with the casual disdain of a noble. Then he turned his eyes to Wintermist without moving his head.
You had it coming. And now?
He stood up, looking at Keen.
Make way, please.
Keen ground his teeth, but after a moment, he stepped aside. The transformed stallion casually walked around the broken table, coming for the door, for me. He was but a step's distance away by the time I managed to regain control of my legs and get out of his way. He stopped as he passed by, setting his eyes on me. He leaned forward, sniffing me again. I couldn't help but to shrink away, to which he gave a satisfied smile.
To your credit,
he said, head tilted towards the others but eyes on me.
She does seem to be it. I'd recognize the scent of Luna anywhere.
He put a gentle hoof under my cheek, and I froze up at his touch.
Honestly, I'm quite amazed.
He put his hoof down, this time turning fully back towards Winters.
You know what? Your plan might work after all, though I'd much rather bet it'll end the world.
Shrugging, he began walking down the dim hall, mumbling under his breath.
I've had enough of this damned existence anyway. I'm fine,
came the cracked voice of Wintermist, followed by a fit of nasty coughs.
I really am.
Schweigen and Flora helped him up, and my jaw dropped. I saw Winter's neck to be entirely intact. That wolf just tore out his throat, yet now he stood on his own hooves as though nothing had happened. I stumbled closer, unable to take my eyes off him. Winters patted the shoulders of Flora and Schweigen, stepping up before me.
Your eyes don't deceive you, Paige. Is this some kind of a trick?
I looked at Flora.
A joke? Did you just want to see my reaction? Well, I don't see the point.
Winters pointed at a letter opener lying on the carpet, apparently fallen from the broken table.
Nix, would you kindly get that for me?
Flora nodded, her magic enveloping the thin blade and lifting it into Winter's hoof. He then looked straight at me, holding the blade up between us. I took a look at it, then raised a brow. Before I could ask, Winters jammed the letter opener into his left eye.
Stars!
I squealed, falling back. As I watched, I felt the prick of the knife in my own body, and the deeper Winters pressed it, the stronger became the pain that coursed through me.
What are you doing?
Winters leaned closer, twisting the blade in his socket, all without making a sound. Every little squish and turn of the tiny knife made me flinch as though it had been in my own eye. I could feel it scratch the borders of my eye socket and scrape the inside of my skull, squashing, scrunching. Slowly, he removed the blade. I felt every inch of it slide out of my own eye, and he presented it to me, almost entirely clean with hardly any blood, and what little there was seemed already dry and ready to peel off. His ruined left eye, a gelatinous mass of bloody tissue, bulged, pulsating to a heartbeat's rhythm. I wanted badly to turn away, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. Even as my eye began to tear up, I couldn't so much as blink the tears away. Gradually, Winter's eye took on a proper globular form, its redness draining away until it was but a clear white sphere. The middle parted and tore itself a pupil hole. The red color of his iris poured out from it. He let the letter opener slide out of his grasp and land with a small thump on the carpet. He gave me an expectant stare, his eyes urging me to have the first word. I couldn't help but take a step back, and I eyed him up and down.
What are you? Isn't it obvious?
Flicking his undone white mane back, he blinked away one last, stray red vein in his new eye and grinned to expose a pair of fangs among his teeth.
I'm a monster, new Paige.
Without turning, I pointed a slack hoof towards the door.
And that other guy?
He waved an apologetic hoof.
An old acquaintance. We're not exactly different, but not exactly the same, he and I.
He looked the others over.
Oh, no need to give me those looks. I really did have it coming. Just a minor misunderstanding, it's nothing to get worked up over.
He put on a reassuring smile.
It's like saying hello for him, really. Unfortunately, he has chosen a different path from mine, and it would appear he decidedly won't reconsider his position anytime soon. I was hoping I could convince him to help us, but I should think I blew it. All on me, that one.
He sighed, nervously brushing his mane with a hoof.
Thank you all for your concern, but as you can see, it takes more than a little sting to hurt me. I should have a talk with dear Paige here now. We've been postponing it far too long. Are you sure?
Asked Keen. Winters nodded back.
Wait downstairs. I'm sure the children are wondering what the commotion was about.
Schweigen clapped Keen on the shoulder, cocking his head towards the door. Keen gave a conceding sigh, and the two quickly left.
Even you, Nix,
Winters said. Flora's cheeks flushed red.
Oh, I. All right.
She turned for the door, but couldn't resist looking back.
Paige. We need you. Really.
With that, she left. Winters waited for the sound of steps to die down, then turned to the door himself.
Wait here, I need to get something.
He cast a glance at the broken table.
I'm sorry about the mess.
He stepped out of the room, going directly for the door across the hallway. Only now did I get a chance to get a proper look around the room, finding much of the same displays of wealth and nobility as I had downstairs. The hall basked in the light of an ornate chandelier, and paintings covered the walls. Sofas and chairs cushioned by what looked like the softest materials from all of Equestria and beyond provided ample seating space for the guests that didn't exist. An array of scented candles burned peacefully on an engraved shelf that some pony must have paid good money for, diffusing a distinct smell of exotic flowers that conjured up images of riches and pretentiousness in equal measure. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but the far wall was covered by a gilded, deep blue curtain. Decoration, I wondered, or are they hiding something back there? Running my gaze across the walls, I stole a peek outside, and found that Wintermist had neglected to completely close the other door behind himself. As impressive as the hall was, Winter's little study captivated me more. Half-melted candles lit that room, shining light on scattered pieces of paper and hastily scribbled notes that stuck to every surface. Stacks of books and heavy tomes stood everywhere. Rather like home, in fact. Though after the previous display, I knew better than to assume Winters was just a kindred spirit. There on the wall, a little above eye level and lit by a set of newer-looking candles, I finally saw the focal point of whatever research Winters was conducting. It was a rough sketch of a young mare with a wide face, striking features, and a big, bushy mane. What details the sketch provided were perfectly enough for me to recognize the pony, but the initials scribbled into the corner of the paper dispelled any doubt, N.P. Winters picked up a book and turned. I instinctively looked away, looking at some painting of the old castle to pretend I hadn't been spying. Winters came back into the hall, and this time I heard him properly close the study's door. He smiled, showing the cover of the book, Soul Link, A Study of Luna's Fractured Spirit, written by Star Swirl the Bearded.
Familiar?
Winters asked.
Hey, I just lifted that the other day. Splendid work on that, if I may say so.
He stepped up beside me, opening the book.
I should apologize for calling you here so suddenly, but it was in fact this book that... Hold on,
I interrupted.
Before we get too deep into this, I'd like to settle a few things. Clue me in a bit.
Winters looked up, his eyes holding a hint of surprise, or even offense. I didn't care for it. He rolled his eyes and slapped the book under his wing.
Fine. Ask away. First, the obvious. You're not really 17, are you? I was 17 when the longest night hit. I was caught by a blood-drinking fiend of Nightmare Moon. A few hours later, I was one of them. I think it is best if I end that story right there.
Friendly as he was, I still had to take a cautious step away.
You drink blood?
More of a statement than a question. He shrugged, giving a short chuckle.
I get enough volunteers. And how come I've never noticed your fangs before?
He grinned, again showcasing his pair of sharp canine teeth.
Among the many extraordinary qualities Nightmare Moon's curse has bestowed on me, I have a skill of, shall we say, subtle manipulation. Simply put, I did not want you to see them.
I crossed my hooves.
Subtle is the last word I'd use to describe you, Winters. Just goes to show you don't know me.
He chuckled again.
I can tell you're concerned. Don't worry now, you've been helping us entirely on your own accord since long before we had ever met. If you need some pony to blame, that should be Nyx, not me.
My eyes narrowed as I stared at him.
I don't suppose you bumped into me by accident the other day.
He raised his brows in feigned fright.
You got me. You know, that's another thing bothering me. The others drummed you up to be some kind of messianic bringer of harmony, and not, well.
I looked him over.
Some weird thing. I suppose the children are a little more impressionable than you.
He looked down for a moment, putting on a smile.
I appreciate their enthusiasm.
He turned back to me.
I'm going to assume Nyx has given you her Children of the Night speech already. She seems to really like giving it.
Winters grinned.
That she does, though she doesn't get to as often as she'd like. Now, if we could focus on the task at Hoof. Oh no, Nye,
I cut in.
That was just the small stuff. Now comes the real question. What was that about Luna back there? Your friend looked at me like, I don't even know. And a kid down there, the little colt, he called me. The progeny.
His expression lit up. He jerked his wing, flicking the book back into his hooves.
So this is the one by Star Swirl. I'm not sure you understand how astoundingly important it is. In fact, I'm surprised they hadn't moved it into the Star Swirl the Bearded wing. I don't see how this relates to my question. Patience, page.
He flicked through the pages, showing diagrams and pentagrams and formulas of potions and magical bombs and whatever else, until he stopped about halfway into the book, prodding a hoof into it.
Here. You know about the night guards, right? I'd expect as much from a student of history. Only what little there is to know. Luna transformed normal ponies into these strange, different forms.
Winters sent me a look and raised a brow.
Though I suppose,
I said,
you would know more about that than I do. I know a few things,
he replied.
For example, I know the night guards are not like me. They are unlike anything else Luna or even Nightmare Moon had ever created. The difference.
He glanced into the book.
Is right here.
The passage he pointed out gave a short description, a summary, it seemed, of the ritual used by Luna to create the night guards. Apparently she had sheared off a piece of her own soul, a process claimed to be immensely painful, in order to sew it between the threads of another soul. It was the magical outpouring of Luna's soul fragment that deformed these ponies and gave them their supernatural powers. As for Luna, her soul would always mend with time, though spectral scars would remain. Whether these scars would ever heal, or what their long-term effect on Luna might be, Star Swirl could only speculate.
I cannot overstate the significance of this, Winters said. Night guards had a part of Luna's soul inside of them, all of them. I don't, and believe me, I've gone to excruciating lengths to make sure of that. This is all very interesting,
I replied,
but what does it all have to do with me?
He smiled, flicking through the pages again all the way to last few.
Here. This is why we need you.
This chapter was quite long and went on until the very end of the book. Here Star Swirl talked about preparing more experiments on a peculiar subject, a torn fragment of Luna's soul, caged inside a crystal orb. Luna had apparently given this up voluntarily to Star Swirl so that the Great Wizard might find out more about magic concerning the manipulation of souls. It also described the enchantments used to protect this priceless artifact from falling into the wrong hooves. A spell had been placed on the crystal that scanned the soul of any pony who touched it. The crystal's container opened only for a select few, Star Swirl, Celestia, or Luna herself. A minor security flaw had been noted here, it seemed that the spell could not differentiate between Luna and her night guards. There was no reason for panic however, as Star Swirl wrote, the night guards were immensely loyal and would never think to go against Luna's word. Thus the crystal, and Luna's soul with it, was safe. Most fascinatingly, the final few entries appeared to have been added after the longest night and Nightmare Moon's banishment, by none other than Princess Celestia herself. The piece of Luna's soul inside the gem was apparently still intact, and as far as any pony could tell, unaffected by the magic of the elements of harmony. Celestia deemed it too dangerous to study any further, though, and had it locked away. In the Star Swirl, the bearded wing of the Canterlot Archives. Having read the last line, I closed the tome and turned to Wintermist. I frowned and shook my head. He smiled and nodded.
No way,
I said.
I can't risk it. I almost got caught the last time, and that was just the lunar wing.
Winters placed a hoof on my shoulder.
Don't worry. I've got this all figured out, and you won't be going alone. Nyx and I will be with you every step of the way.
I shook him off.
Look, even if we get in there, and even if we find this thing, and these are pretty big ifs, mind you, even then we won't be able to use it. It's got a spell lock, and I don't assume you know any night guards willing to help. Like I said, I have a plan.
He cocked his head the other way, pointing the tip of his wing towards the door to his study.
You want to find out about your dreams, don't you? I believe I have an answer, but I cannot be certain. Not until I have the crystal.
A spark of anger flared up inside of me, I'd had enough of his game. I stomped hard.
What is the answer?
He took a step back, but by the intrigued smile on his lips, it was not out of fright. He looked me over once, then leaned close.
I believe you have a piece of Luna's soul inside of you, new page.
Swift sweep. Lullaby arrived at dawn.
Have you heard they?
I slammed the door behind her and stuffed the night's report into her hooves.
The White Wolf in Canterlot? Oh, I noticed.
I pointed at the pages.
Read.
She sifted through the papers quickly.
What, Nyx?
She looked up at me in confusion, I just nodded towards the papers.
This is huge. We've even got a name. Flora. And she dyes her coat. Damn. No wonder we never caught her. And you?
She flicked further.
You followed them. You left your post here and you followed them. Was I supposed to let Nyx get away? In fact, yes.
She chewed her lip, shaking her head.
You sure it was her? There is absolutely no mistaking that amulet.
She read along.
You saw the white wolf. And he.
She scratched her head.
So this is when you lost them, when he distracted you. No way this is a coincidence. If the white wolf is working with the children of the night. Riverflow has to see this. River?
I asked.
TG might be interested as well. Damn it, Swift.
Snapped Lullaby.
Do you want Grotto to die? Let's not give him clues on how to find the wolf.
She didn't let me respond.
River got Project Heartbreak after TG got reassigned. He shepherds all the new kids Celestia put on that task.
I rubbed my forehead.
Yeah, of course. Well, you have the day shift, so.
I held my hoof out.
I'll take this to him right away. Are you sure about that? I'm sure I could break protocol just this once. I mean, you already have last night. Look, if New Page is dealing with the children of the night. It hurts me, Lullaby. It really does. But I have to be the one to do this. I need this.
Lullaby looked back at the pages, nodding to herself in contemplation.
Very well.
She arranged the papers and gave them back.
You be quick about it, okay? No detours. No second thoughts. No doubts.
I smiled.
I serve Equestria. To doubt would be to harm us all.